Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 4 creepiest graves ever discovered across the US, we return to the quiet edges of the world where the hum of the living fades, and only the wind moves through the graves. These are the stories buried in stone and soil, tombs that whisper, monuments that bleed history, and resting places that refuse to rest. Every account you're about to hear is real, taken from those who've stood before these graves and felt the chill of something watching from below. My goal this month is to reach 4,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers wander in, listen, and vanish into the dark without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a grave or cemetery in your town that truly unsettles you, type its name below. Because when the world sleeps and the soil settles, some things beneath it do not rest. Kill the lights. Silence the world. Take a slow breath and let us begin. I found a grave with only one name. My name's Travis Morrow. I'm from Madrone Hollow, California, and I work as a right-of-way maintenance tech. Listen, I am sitting here at 3 a.m. with my car idling because if I turn it off, it might not crank again. And I am parked right up by the gate where the county put a chain and a sign that says keep out, like that sign is going to do anything. I have my phone up in my hand, screen cracked clean through the corner, and I keep checking over my shoulder at the fence because I do not trust the dark on the other side of it anymore. I swear to God, I am not trying to tell a scary story. I am trying to say what happened, the way it happened, because if I keep it in my head, it keeps replaying and changing, and I need it out of me. It started like nothing. It started like a morning that smelled like cold exhaust and wet leaves and that cheap hand soap we keep in the yard bathroom. I had one of those gas station breakfast burritos, the kind that tastes like paper and salt and makes your stomach feel heavy. And I had black coffee in a foam cup that burned my tongue. I remember that because later, when I was shaking, I could still taste that burned spot on my tongue like it was the only real thing left. I was wearing my faded orange work shirt, the one with the little reflective strips, and there was a stain right under the left pocket from chain lube. It never comes out. I had on my work boots with dried mud stuck in the tread. I checked my phone at 6:12 because my supervisor texts early, and I always look in case he changes the route. That day he did. He wrote, "You and Ben go up to the Old North, cut and clear the brush along the access road. Fire guys want it opened before the wind." That was it. Not weird, just work. Madrone Hollow is one of those places where people drive through and do not notice it. A few blocks of houses, a diner with the same neon sign since before I was born, a feed store, and then hills. You get out past the last mailbox, and it turns into oak and chaparral and dry grass, even in winter. The access road we were sent to is not on most maps. It is a dirt ribbon that used to go to something before the county stopped caring. We call it the North Cut because it cuts along the slope. There is an old gate halfway up, just a cattle gate with broken wire. And past that, it is mostly ruts and rocks. We were supposed to clear brush away from the road edge, so a fire engine could squeeze through if they had to, and also so the guy with the water truck would stop complaining that branches were scraping his tank. Ben showed up in his own truck, late like always, chewing sunflower seeds. And he had that look on his face like he had not slept. He said, "Morning, man." And I said, "Morning." We talked about nothing. We always talk about nothing. He told me his kid had a cough. We laughed about how my car was going to die in the yard one day, and I would have to push it like a lawnmower. Nothing felt off. Not then. We drove up with the brush cutter in the back and the gas cans and the long-handled loppers. The sky was that flat winter gray where the sun is there but you cannot find it. The ground had that dampness it gets after a light rain, where the dirt holds a chill. There were plastic grocery bags caught in the manzanita like little flags. When we got to the gate, there was a new chain across it, not the old rusty one, a bright silver chain with a new padlock. Ben said, Huh, we are not supposed to have a lock here. I said maybe fire guys did it. I called my supervisor, and he did not answer. I did not think anything of it, so I did what I always do. I took the bolt cutters out, the big ones, and I cut the chain. It snapped with that clean sound like breaking a bone in a cooked chicken, and I remember how sharp it sounded in the quiet. Ben made a face. He said, "You sure about that?" I said, "We have a job. If it is a problem, they can yell at me." We drove through and closed the gate behind us out of habit, even though it is pointless, and we started working. Brush cutting is loud, but not in a normal way. It is like the sound fills your head and pushes everything else out. You get into a rhythm. Cut, drag, pile. Cut, drag, pile. The smell is green and bitter when you open a branch, and the little bits of leaf dust stick to your sweat. After maybe an hour, Ben waved at me and pointed up the slope. There was a patch of darker trees, taller, and the brush looked less chewed up there, like it had been left alone. He shouted over the cutter, "There is a fence line. We gotta clear it too." So we climbed. The slope was slick in spots. I slipped once and caught myself on a stump, and I got a smear of mud on the knee of my pants. I remember that. My right knee, brown streak. Like a kid, we got up into the darker trees and the air changed. It felt colder and still. The wind that had been rattling the dry grass down below just stopped like someone shut a door. We found the fence line, and it was not a fence like for cattle. It was old iron posts with chunks of chain link still hanging, bent and half swallowed by vines. It looked like somebody had tried to fence something off a long time ago and gave up. There was a narrow gap where the chain link had fallen away, and behind it, the ground was uneven, and there were stones. At first, I thought it was old dumped concrete. Then I saw the shape, a rectangle with a beveled top, a headstone. Ben stopped moving. He just stood there with his loppers hanging. He said, "Dude, there is a cemetery up here." And there was. Not big. Not like rows. More like a forgotten pocket. Maybe 20 stones. Some sunk into the dirt. Some tipped like they were trying to lay down. There were oaks leaning over it. Branches tangled so thick the sky was just thin gray strips. The ground inside that fence line looked different. Less brush, more bare dirt, and patches of grass that grew weirdly short like it was being trimmed, even though nobody had been up there. That is the first wrong detail, I think. The grass was too neat, not golf course neat, just like it was being pressed down regularly by something. Ben whispered, "Who keeps this up?" I did not answer. We were not supposed to be in there, but we were also told to clear the fence line, and technically, it was county land. Ben stepped in through the gap, and I followed. The air inside felt like standing in a refrigerator that is not plugged in but still holds cold. You know what I mean. That stale cold. There were plastic flowers on a few stones, old and sun-faded, but they were not dusty. They looked like they had been set there recently. They did not move in the wind because there was no wind. Ben said, "I do not like this." I said, "We clear the brush around the outside and leave. We do not mess with anything. We do not even need to step in." But I was already in, and my boots crunched on gravel that I had not seen from outside. Somebody had put gravel down at some point, and it was still there, under the leaf litter. The crunch sounded too loud, like it carried. I turned my head, and I swear for a second it felt like the sound went ahead of me. Like the crunch happened and then a beat later my foot landed. That sounds crazy. I know. Wait. No. That was later. I am mixing it up. The first real thing was the stone. There was one headstone near the center that looked newer than the others. Not polished, but not as worn. It was gray, straight, not leaning. It had a name on it that I am not going to say because I cannot stand to say it out loud, and also because you are going to think I am lying. Just know it was a normal name, not spooky, not biblical, normal. The weird part was the dates. One was carved like you would expect, and the other was not a date you would expect to see. It was like the last number was wrong, like whoever carved it did not know what year it was. Ben squinted and said, "That cannot be right." I walked closer, and my throat got tight. Because the last name on that stone, I knew it. Not like famous. Like I had seen it on a mailbox in town. Like I had signed a work order with it a month ago. I could not place it, but my body recognized it before my brain did. That is how it felt. Like my body went, "That is not supposed to be here." Ben laughed a little, a nervous laugh, and said, "Maybe some family plot. Madrone Hollow has old families." I said, "Yeah," but my voice came out thin. I looked down at the base of the stone and there was a little metal plaque on a stake like what funeral homes put for temporary markers. It was blank, no writing, just clean metal, no rust, like it had been pushed into the ground yesterday. I remember thinking, why would a blank plaque be here? Why go to the trouble? Ben reached out like he was going to touch the stone, and I said, "Do not." I do not know why I said it like that. Like touching would do something. He pulled his hand back and rolled his eyes a little, but he did not touch it. He said, "Fine, whatever. Let us just clear the outside and go." We backed out through the gap and started cutting brush along the fence line. We did not go back inside. We kept our backs to it as much as we could. That is when I noticed the sound. The brush cutter was off for a minute because I was refueling. And in the quiet I heard footsteps on gravel inside that little cemetery pocket. Slow, deliberate, crunch, pause, crunch. Like somebody walking and stopping to look at stones. Ben looked at me and his eyes got wide. I wanted to call out, "Hello, county maintenance," but my mouth would not do it. The footsteps stopped. The air felt thicker, like you could feel it pushing against your face. Ben did call out. He said, "Hey, we are working out here, just letting you know." Then the footsteps started again, but closer to the fence line, like whoever it was had walked up to the inside of the chain link and was now right behind us. I did not see anybody through the vines. I did not see a shadow, but I could hear gravel. The weird thing is, the gravel sounded like it was on both sides of the fence at once, like it was under our boots too. Even though we were on dirt and leaves, I looked down at my feet, and for a second I saw gravel under the leaves where there had not been any. Little pale stones, like someone had sprinkled them. I blinked and it was dirt again. I told myself it was my eyes. Ben said, "Let us go," and we did. We packed up fast, not clean. We left a pile half done. We got back in the trucks and drove down to the gate. I remember the feeling of relief when I saw the open space beyond the trees, like stepping out of a cramped room. We got to the gate, and the chain was back. Same bright silver chain. Same padlock, hanging across like we had never cut it. Ben stopped his truck so hard the front dipped. He leaned out the window and stared at it. He said, "No. No way." I got out, and my hands were shaking, and I walked up to the chain. The cut ends were not there. There was no break. It was one continuous chain, looped and locked. The padlock looked untouched. I took my bolt cutters again, and my brain was trying to do math it could not do. I cut it. Again. Same clean snap sound. We drove through. Ben kept looking in his mirror the whole way down. He said, "I do not know. Some tweaker. Some kids." I said, "There are no kids up there." He said, "Then who?" We got back to the yard, and my supervisor was finally there. I told him about the chain and the cemetery and the footsteps. He stared at me like I was wasting his time. He said, "There is no cemetery up there." I said, Yes, there is. He said, that land has an old plot, but it is not accessible, and you are not supposed to go in. I said, we did not go in, not really. He said, do not go back. Fire guys will handle it. That should have been the end. That should have been me going home and eating dinner and forgetting. But that night I could not forget that stone with the name I recognized. I kept picturing that blank metal plaque like a tongue with no words. I kept hearing gravel. When I shut my eyes, I could feel the cold air under the oaks. I tried to tell my girlfriend about it while we ate, and she said, you are tired, Travis. Stop thinking about work. She asked what I wanted for Christmas, like normal, and I could not answer. I got up in the night to pee, and I checked my phone, and it was 2:47. And my car battery alarm app, the little cheap one I use, had a notification that the voltage had dipped. That is why I am sitting here now at 3 a.m. Because I do not trust my car to start if I shut it off, and I do not trust my brain to shut off if I go back inside my house. The next day, Ben called me before work. He sounded wrong. His voice was too high. He said, man, did you take a picture up there? He said, of the stone, the one we looked at. I said, no, did you? He said, I did, and it is not right. I told him to send it. He texted me the photo. It was a headstone. Gray, straight. But the name on it was not the name we read. It was another name. Still normal, but not the one that made my stomach clench. The dates were different too. In the photo, the years looked correct. There was no blank metal plaque at the base. I stared at the screen until my eyes hurt. I called him. I said, that is not the stone. He said, it is. I swear it is. I took it standing right there. And then he said something that made my skin go tight. Just like a shape. Darker than the trees. I zoomed in and my heart started pounding. Because there was a darker strip behind the stone, like a shadow that fell the wrong way. The light in the photo was flat gray, so there should not have been a sharp shadow. But there it was, like a tall, thin smear on the ground, and it pointed toward us, not away. Ben said, I did not see anybody when I took it. I said, delete it. I do not know why I said that. Like deleting would change anything. But I said it. He said, I already tried. It will not delete. It keeps coming back. Ben does not cry. He is the kind of guy who jokes when he gets hurt. I said, bring it to the yard. We will show the supervisor and have fire guys check. He said, I am not going up there again. I said, Loci, wasn't the road. Wasn't the road an 80? Neither am I. That morning when I got to the yard, my bolt cutters were in the back of my truck like always, but the jaws were wrapped in bright silver chain, like somebody had threaded chain through them and crimped it. Not like a prank. Like a knot. Tight and neat. The same kind of chain. I held it up and stared at it, and my hands got sweaty. I asked around, who put this here? Nobody admitted it. The supervisor told me to stop playing and get to work. Ben did not show up that day. But I could tell he was lying because his texts were too short, like he was trying not to give his phone anything to latch onto. I tried to work the rest of the day like normal, but I kept seeing that chain. I kept hearing gravel when the wind blew through leaves. After work, I drove out toward the north cut, not to go in, just to pass the road like proof that it was real. I told myself I was just checking the route for tomorrow because the fire guys might call us back. I stopped at the turnout where you can see the gate from the county road. It was getting late, that late afternoon where the light should still be there, but it already feels like evening. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel and my mouth dry. I told myself, good. Fire guys removed it. Then I saw something that made my stomach drop. On the inside of the gate, on the dirt road, there was a line of gravel, like a thin trail. pale stones scattered like breadcrumbs leading up the road toward that slope. That gravel was not there before. The county does not put gravel on that road. It is dirt. And the gravel line was too neat, like a path someone wanted you to follow. I did not get out. I did not follow it. I drove away, and the whole time I was driving, I felt like I was being watched from the passenger seat. Not like a person, just like attention. Like something had turned its face toward me, even if it had no face. I got home and tried to eat, but the food tasted like metal. My girlfriend asked what was wrong, and I said, "Work stuff." She said, "You are acting strange." I wanted to say, "There is a place up there that changes its own rules," but I could not. I went to bed and I dreamed of headstones with blank plaques and dates that slid like wet paint. I woke up with my mouth open like I had been trying to breathe through water. The next day, we got called in early. Fire guys had found something, and the sheriff was involved. That is what my supervisor said, and he said it with that tone, like he did not want to talk about it. He told me and Ben to meet him at the yard. Ben actually came, and he looked like he had not slept in a week. His eyes were red. He kept rubbing his hands together. He would not look at my truck bed. He said, "Are we going up there?" My supervisor said, "We are going to stand where they tell us and answer questions if they ask. That is it. Do not touch anything. Do not wander." The way he said wander made my stomach twist. We drove in a little convoy, my truck, Ben's truck, supervisor's truck, and a sheriff SUV. The sheriff did not talk to us. He looked straight ahead the whole time, like he was driving through a tunnel. When we got to the gate, the bright silver chain was there again. Uncut. Locked. The sheriff got out, pulled out a key, and unlocked it like he owned it. Ben looked at me and mouthed, "What?" I did not have words. The sheriff swung the gate open and we drove in. The gravel line was gone. The road looked like it always looks, dirt and ruts, but the air felt colder as soon as we passed the gate. My phone lost signal. It still had bars, but nothing would load. My supervisor said, "Stay close." Fire guys were up ahead, a couple of them, and a coroner van. Seeing that van made my skin crawl, because nothing about what we saw should have needed a coroner. We did not see a body. We did not see anything. A woman with her hair in a tight bun walked over and said, "You are the county guys who were here earlier this week." My supervisor nodded. She looked at me and Ben and said, "Did you go inside the fenced plot?" Ben started shaking his head hard. I said, "We stepped in through the gap. Just a little. We did not disturb anything." She stared at me for a long time, and I could not read her face. Then she said, "We found a collapse, a grave sinking. The ground opened under a brush pile." She said it like she was trying to make it normal, like a sinkhole. Then she said, "The sheriff told us to stay back." We did, but you could still see through the trees if you angled your head. You could see the chain link gap. You could see the darker oaks. You could see a few of the stones. The newest stone was visible. It looked straight. It looked clean. But the name on it from where I stood, it looked blank, like the letters were not catching light. I blinked hard. My eyes watered. I told myself it was distance. The coroner and 2 deputies went in. They walked carefully, like they were on ice. I could hear their boots on gravel, and the sound made my teeth hurt. It was the same crunch, pause, crunch, pause. Ben whispered, "Do not listen." I could not stop. The crunching stopped. I heard a deputy say, "Hold up," and then the coroner said, "That is not possible." She did not sound scared. She sounded annoyed, like paperwork. Then the sheriff raised his voice and said, "Everybody out, now." The coroner and deputies backed out fast. One deputy tripped and caught himself on a post, and when his hand touched the post, I saw him jerk like he got shocked. He pulled his hand back and stared at his palm like it had something on it. The sheriff walked up to the gap and looked in. He did not step through. He just looked, head tilted, like listening. Then he did something I will not forget. He took his radio, held it up, and said, "Say it again." And a voice came through the radio, but it was not a dispatcher. It was not any code I have heard. It was a low voice, calm, like someone reading a name list. I could not make out the words at first. Then I realized it was saying a name, just one name, repeated. And it was the name I saw on the stone the first day, the one I am not saying. The sheriff's face went white. He turned his radio off hard, like slamming a door. Ben grabbed my sleeve. His fingers hurt. He whispered, "That is the name. That is the name you saw. How does the radio know?" I could not answer. My supervisor stepped forward, and the sheriff snapped, "Stay back." My supervisor stopped like a dog corrected by a leash. The fire captain pulled him aside. They talked in low voices. I could not hear. All I could hear was gravel inside that plot. Even though nobody was walking now. Crunch, pause, crunch. Like someone pacing. Like someone searching. Then the coroner, still standing outside, said, "There are 2 sets of remains in one container." She used the word container. Not coffin, not casket. Container. Like she did not want to make it human. One deputy said, 2. She said, 2. Bound together. She did not say how. She just said it like that. Bound together. The sheriff stared at her and said, "Is there a second marker?" She said, "No. There is only one name on the stone." And then she said, "And the name is not staying the same." When she said that, my legs went weak. I had to grab the side of my truck. Ben made a sound like a cough, but it was fear. The sheriff said, "What do you mean not staying the same?" The coroner looked down at her clipboard, and her hand was shaking, just a little, like she was trying to hide it. She said, "We photographed it." We looked away to set the scale. The letters were different. The dates were different. She swallowed and said, "And the second set of remains is not always there. Sometimes it is there. Sometimes it is not." She said it, and then she shut her mouth like she wished she had not. The fire captain said, "We are shutting this down." The sheriff said, "I need this fenced and watched." The fire captain said, "We are not posting someone here overnight." The sheriff said, "I am." And the way he said it made my stomach clench because he did not sound sure. He sounded like he was arguing with something bigger than him. They told us to leave. They told us to go back to the yard and wait. As we walked back to our trucks, I glanced toward the gap one more time, because I saw the newest stone clearly through the vines. And it had a name on it, carved deep. And it was not the name from the first day. And it was not the name from Ben's photo. It was my last name, Morrow. Just that. No first name. Just Morrow. And the dates under it, one of them looked like it was still being decided. Like the numbers were not finished. Like someone started carving and stopped. I could hear my own pulse. Ben said, "Travis, what is it?" I did not tell him. I could not. I got in my truck and started it, and my hands were shaking so bad the key rattled. I drove down behind the sheriff, and as I passed the gate, I looked in my mirror and I saw the chain-link fence line through the trees. Not a clear person, not a face, just a shape that was too still. And then the trees hid it. I told myself it was a post. I told myself it was my brain. But when we got back to the yard, Ben said, "Did you see somebody?" He did not look at me when he asked. He stared at the ground like he was talking to a crack in the concrete. I said, "No." He said, "I did." I said, "What did it look like?" He said, like it was waiting to be told what it was. That is what he said. And that sentence has been living in my head ever since. That afternoon, the sheriff came to the yard and talked to our supervisor. Then he pulled me aside. He asked if I had cut the chain at the gate earlier in the week. I said yes. He asked if I still had the bolt cutters. I said yes. He asked if anyone else had used them. I said no. He stared at me like he was trying to decide if I was dangerous or stupid. Then he said, "Do not go near that place again. If you see anything from it, if you find anything at your home, you call this number." He wrote a number on a card and handed it to me. The card was blank otherwise. No department, no name. Just a number. He said, "Do not post about it. Do not talk about it." And then he hesitated and he said, "I showered. I ate a bowl of cereal because I could not handle hot food." At 9:36, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It said, "Morrow." Just that. No punctuation. I stared at it until my eyes went blurry. I did not respond. I deleted it. It came back, not as a new text. The same text, still there, like it had never been deleted. My girlfriend asked who it was and I said, "Spam." She said, "You are sweating." I said, "It is hot in here." It was not hot. I went outside to my car because I needed to breathe, and when I opened the driver's side door, the smell hit me. Wet earth, cut grass, that cold refrigerator smell from under the oaks. I froze with my hand on the door frame. My car has never smelled like that. It smelled like oil and old fast food wrappers. But for a moment, it smelled like that plot. I slammed the door. I walked back inside. I checked the locks 3 times. I could not sleep. Around midnight, I heard gravel. Not outside. In my head, I thought. But then I realized it was real. It was outside. Faint. Like someone walking on a gravel driveway. I do not have a gravel driveway. I have concrete. I went to the window and looked out. The streetlight was on, and the street looked normal. But along the edge of my front yard, right by the sidewalk, there was a line of pale stones. Gravel, like breadcrumbs, leading from the sidewalk to my front steps. My stomach turned over. I backed away from the window like it could see me through the glass. I did not open the door. I did not step outside. I stood there until my legs hurt, just staring, waiting for something to move. Nothing moved. The wind did not blow it. It was too still. My hands shook the whole time. I dumped it in the trash. That night, the gravel was back. Same line, same stones. I swept it again. It came back again. 3 nights in a row. I did not tell anyone. I did not call the number on the card because I was embarrassed, like it would sound stupid. Like I was calling the sheriff to report rocks. But on the 4th night, I got brave or desperate. I do not know which. And I followed the gravel line with my eyes. And I noticed something. The stones were not random. They formed a pattern if you looked from above. Like letters that did not want to be letters. I stepped closer, and my phone buzzed again. Another unknown text. It said, "Open." I swear to God, I felt my whole body lean toward the door for a second like I was being pulled. Not like a hand, like a habit, like when someone says your name and you turn without thinking. I grabbed the door handle and then I stopped. I do not know why I stopped. Maybe because I pictured that newest stone with my last name on it. Maybe because Ben's sentence came back, waiting to be told what it was. I let go of the handle. I backed away. My girlfriend came into the hallway and said, "Travis, what are you doing?" I said, "Nothing." I lied. I hate that I lied, but I did. The next day at work, Ben did not talk much. He kept checking his phone and wiping his palms on his pants. At lunch, he finally said, It is at my house too. I said, what is? He said, gravel. He said it like it was a dirty word. He said it shows up by his back gate, like a path, and he swept it, and it came back. He said his kid asked why there were rocks. He said he told his kid squirrels did it. He laughed once, a sharp little laugh that died fast. Then he said, my photo changed again. I said, what do you mean? He showed me his phone. The picture of the headstone now had no name at all. Smooth stone, like an erased chalkboard. But in the grass in front of it, there were two shadows, side by side, holding each other, except there was no one standing to cast them. The shadows pointed toward the camera, toward Ben. I felt like I was going to throw up. I told him, call the sheriff number. He said, I did. It rang and rang, and then someone answered, and it was my own voice. He said he hung up. He said it called back. He did not answer. I said, you are lying. He started crying, then silent, just tears leaking out while he stared at his sandwich like he did not know what it was. I did not know what to do. I told my supervisor I was sick and went home early. I drove the long way, avoiding the county road that passes the turnout where you can see the gate. I turned the radio up loud so I would not hear my own thoughts. At a stop sign, my car stalled for a second. Just a cough, and my chest went tight because I thought, this is it. It is going to die, and I am going to be stuck with my back to the hillside and the cemetery. It started again, but the fear did not leave. That night, the gravel line at my steps was thicker. More stones. Like it was getting impatient. The text messages kept coming. Always from unknown numbers. Always short. Morrow. Open. Look. Come. I did not respond. I did not open the door. I put my phone on airplane mode and the screen still lit up like it was receiving something that did not need signal. I took the SIM out and it still buzzed. I threw it in a drawer and I could still hear it buzzing in my head, like a phantom vibration. I started sleeping on the couch because I did not want to be near the front door. My girlfriend thought I was having a breakdown. She said maybe I should see someone. She said I was scaring her. I wanted to say I am scared too, but I could not explain it without sounding insane. On the 5th day, Ben stopped coming to work. No call, no text. Just gone. His truck was not in his driveway. His phone went straight to voicemail. I drove by his house once, in daylight, like a stupid person. And there was gravel in a line from his front steps to the sidewalk, and then farther, like it was leading away, like he followed it. I sat in my car across the street and my hands were sweating and I kept thinking, do not get out, do not get out. I did not get out. I left. Later that day, the sheriff came to the yard again. He asked if anyone had seen Ben. My supervisor said no. The sheriff's jaw clenched like he was biting something. He said, if he contacts you, do not answer. If you see him, do not go near him. Call. He said it like a warning about a dangerous animal. I said, is he missing? The sheriff looked at me and for a second his eyes looked tired, like he had been staring at the wrong thing for too long. He said, people are not just missing. He said, they get rearranged. Then he walked away. I stood there feeling cold in the sun. That is when the climax hit me. Not all at once, but like a door finally opening. I went home and I could not stand being in my house. The gravel line was there again. And this time, in among the stones, there was something else. A small metal plaque, like the blank one at the stone base. It was pushed into the soil right by my doorstep. It was blank. But when the porch light hit it at an angle, I saw faint scratches like letters that had been written and then rubbed out. I crouched down and my heart was pounding. And I swear to God I smelled that cemetery cold. I did not touch the plaque. I did not pull it up. I just stared. Then my phone, in the drawer, buzzed hard like it was angry. I yanked the drawer open, grabbed the phone, and the screen was on even though it should have been dead. It was Ben's headstone photo, but it was not from Ben. The stone in the photo now said Morrow, carved deep, and the dates under it looked unfinished like before. And behind the stone, in that darker strip, there was a shape. And the shape looked like it was bending, like it was trying to become two things at once. And at the bottom of the photo, on the edge of the frame, I could see something bright, a silver chain, looped like a loose knot. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor and the screen did not crack further, but the photo stayed there, glowing. I backed up until my shoulder hit the wall. I said out loud, "No, just that. No." My voice sounded small in my own house. The porch light flickered. The gravel made a sound, a soft shift, like someone stepped on it from the inside of the stones. I heard footsteps then, right outside my front door, crunching on gravel that should not be there. Slow and deliberate. Crunch. Pause. And then a voice, not loud, right on the other side of the door, said my last name. Not shouted, not scary voice. Calm, like reading a list, like the radio. Morrow. My knees went weak. I put my hand over my mouth. The door handle turned a little, just a twitch, like someone testing it. It was locked. It stopped. Then the voice said, "Open." I did not open. I slid down the wall and held my knees and shook like I was freezing. The footsteps moved away, deeper into the night, crunching, pausing, crunching, like it was walking toward the street. I waited a long time. I do not know how long. My phone clock later said I lost almost an hour, but I do not remember that hour. I remember sitting there with my ear pressed to the door, listening for gravel that was not supposed to exist. When I finally stood up, my legs were numb. I opened the little peephole cover and looked out. The porch was empty. The gravel line was gone. The plaque was gone, like it had never been there. In the morning, I called the sheriff number. It rang once, and someone answered. A man's voice. Not my voice. He said, "Yeah." I said, "It is Travis Morrow, county maintenance." He went quiet for a beat. And then he said, "Do not say that name." I said, "It is my name." He said, "Not out loud, not into a phone, not where it can bounce." I said, "It was at my door." He said, "I know." I said, "What is it?" Wine OP. He said, "It is a record that will not stay closed." He said, "It is trying to make the world match what it thinks is true." I said, "What does it think is true?" He said, "That too can be held under one name." He said, "That one marker can contain more than it admits." He said, "That if it can get you to answer, it can file you." Those were his words. File you. Like paperwork. Like you become a thing on a list. I started crying then, and I did not even feel it coming. I said, "How do I stop it?" He said, "You do not feed it. You do not answer. You do not touch what it leaves. You do not go near any burial ground, any marker, any fence line. You do not look at names. You do not say names. You let it starve." I said, "What about Ben?" He went quiet. Then he said, "If Ben comes back, it will not be Ben the way you mean it." He said, "I am sorry." I hung up and I sat on my kitchen floor and I stared at the tile like it was the only solid thing left in my life. Since then, I have changed everything. I do not drive past cemeteries. I take the long routes even if it adds 20 minutes. I do not go to funerals. I do not step onto church property if there are stones out back. I avoid the old part of town where the small graveyard sits behind the chapel because I cannot stand the sight of headstones. I turn the radio up when I see a fence that looks like it could hold dead ground. I stopped wearing my orange work shirt because every time I saw the stain under the pocket, I thought of that blank plaque and the unfinished date. I told my supervisor I needed leave. He tried to argue, and I almost screamed at him. And then he saw my face and he stopped. My girlfriend thinks I am depressed. She thinks I am afraid of work. She does not understand that it is not the work. It is a rule that broke and is still breaking. 2 under 1 name. A stone that will not hold still. Evidence that cannot be explained and does not want to be explained. I keep my phone off most of the time now, but sometimes, even when it is off, the screen will light for a second, like a blink, and I will see a word, open, or I will see my last name, just sitting there like someone left it on the table. Tonight, my car battery started clicking again, and I panicked, and I grabbed my keys and drove, and I ended up here, at this gate, like a stupid person, because I needed to see if it was real, if the place was still there, if the fence still existed. I am parked on the road that runs along the cemetery fence, not inside, and the graves are on the other side, and I can see the tops of stones through the metal bars if I lean. There is no wind. The flags on the roadside do not move. The streetlights do not reach the fence line. My phone says 3-8 now. I am telling you this because I cannot keep holding it, and because I just saw something that made my blood go cold. There is gravel on the asphalt by my front tire. Pale little stones, scattered in a thin line that leads from the fence toward my driver's side door. I did not bring gravel. There is no gravel on this road. The line is getting longer. 1 stone at a time, like it is being placed. Patient, like it has all night, like it has all the nights it wants. I am not going to open the door and step onto it. I am not going to answer my phone if it rings. I am going to keep the engine running, and I am going to drive until I see streetlights that actually touch the ground. But I need you to hear me. Listen, because if you ever see a line of gravel where gravel should not be, if you ever see a new chain where you cut an old one, if you ever see a headstone with 1 name that does not feel like it belongs to just 1 person, you turn around. You do not get curious. You do not take a picture. You do not say the name out loud. You let it starve, because I swear to God, it is not trying to scare you. It is trying to file you. I won't park by cemeteries anymore. My name's Caleb Mercer. I'm from Larkspur Gap, up on the Ridge Road outside a little river town. Folks only remember when the bridge floods, and I work as a night security guard for a funeral home that sits right beside an old Appalachian burial ground that isn't on most maps. Listen, I'm sitting here right now at 3 in the morning with my car angled toward the gate, because if I point it the other way, I swear I'll look up and see something between the stones, and the battery's so weak the dash lights keep dimming like the car's blinking at me, and my phone screen is cracked down the middle from when my hand shook and I dropped it. And I keep thinking I hear gravel under my tires even though I have not moved an inch. I swear to God I have not moved. I wasn't looking for anything that night. Man, I wasn't out here chasing stories. I was doing my job. And I know how that sounds. Like everybody says that, but you can smell this place and you'd understand why I'm not making this up. The cut grass and wet stone, and that metal taste in the air like the fog is licking the back of your throat. And you can hear the plastic flowers before you see them. They rattle like cheap teeth. That day started normal. That's the sick part. It started so normal it makes me mad. I ate 2 toaster waffles because I was out of eggs, and I drank gas station coffee that tasted like burned pennies. And I put on my gray work shirt with the stitched patch over the chest, the one with my first name on it. And there's this stain on the lower hem from last week that won't come out, like ground-in mud. And I remember thinking I should finally throw the shirt away because it made me look sloppy. I checked my phone in the kitchen, and it was late afternoon. I remember because the light coming through my blinds was that color that makes you think the day is already over, even when it isn't. and I had to be on site early because there'd been a complaint. That's what they called it, a complaint. Somebody drove by the cemetery fence on the Ridge Road and said they saw lights moving between the headstones like somebody walking with a lantern. And then they said they heard something that sounded like metal on stone, like a shovel hitting a marker. And they called the funeral home instead of the police, because around here folks call the funeral home like it's the same thing as the sheriff. The director, Mr. Harlan, called me while I was still pulling my boots on, and he said, "Caleb, I need you in early. Stay by the cemetery gate. Make sure nobody gets in. We've got a situation." And I said, "What kind of situation?" And he said, "Just do your job." And I said, "Okay." Because that's what you do when you need the paycheck. And you don't have the kind of life where you can be picky. I drove up there with the radio low, and I said, "Okay, you can be picky." The old country station that cuts in and out under the ridge. And I remember the radio did this weird thing, where it played the same line twice. Not a song line, a weather red, like the guy said there's a dense fog advisory, and then he said it again in the exact same cadence, and I tapped the dash like that would fix it. I pulled into the lot behind the funeral home where the loading bay is, and the whole building looked like it was holding its breath. All the windows dark except the office light, and the cemetery is right there behind it. Not a fancy place, just old stones leaning and names worn down and some newer markers shoved in wherever there was room. And there's a fence that runs along the road, and a gate with a chain, and I've stood at that gate 100 times on shifts, smoking my nicotine gum and watching deer cross like they own the place. Harlan was in the office with a folder open and his tie half loosened like he'd been tugging it, and he didn't look up right away. He just kept flipping through papers like he was trying to find a page that wasn't there. I said, "You called me." And then he did look up and his eyes were red like he hadn't slept, and he said, "Caleb, if anybody comes up here tonight, anybody, you do not open that gate. You do not let them in. You call me first." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "And if you hear anything in the cemetery, you stay out of it. You stay on the roadside. You hear me?" And I laughed a little because it sounded like he was talking to a kid. And I said, "Sure." And then he said, and his voice got thin on that last word like it hurt him to say it. I asked him what was going on, and he pointed at the folder and said, "If you know, he know. We've got a delivery coming and the paperwork is wrong." And I said, "Wrong how?" And he said, "Missing." And that's when I noticed the folder was full of forms except the one that matters most, the certificate, the one that proves somebody is supposed to be in a box. And I don't know why I said it, but I said, "You can't do a burial without that." And he stared at me like I'd just reminded him the sky is blue. And he said, "It'll be here in the morning. It's a county delay." And I said, "Okay." And then he said, "And if anyone asks, you haven't seen anything." And I said, "Asks who?" And he said, "Anyone?" And then he stood up like the conversation was done, and he pushed the folder toward the edge of his desk like he didn't want it near him. I went outside and did the usual checks: doors, locks, lights, the chain on the gate. And I remember the chain felt colder than it should, like it had been sitting in ice water, and the padlock had a smear of dirt on it that looked fresh. The fog started creeping up the hill early, low and thick, and it made the cemetery stones look like they were floating, just tops of markers sticking out like teeth in milk. And I stood by the fence line on the roadside like he told me. And the first hour was boring. Just me and the sound of traffic way down the hill that faded as the sun went. I texted my sister about something dumb. I think she'd asked if I could help move a couch this weekend, and my phone auto-corrected and I got annoyed. And I remember that because it's the last normal annoyance I had before everything went wrong. Around dusk, the delivery truck came. Not a big one, just a white box truck with no logo, and it pulled into the loading bay like it had been there before even though I didn't recognize it. The driver got out and he didn't look at me. He just walked straight to the bay door and knocked twice. And it wasn't a normal knock. It was like he was tapping a rhythm. He expected someone to answer. And I remember thinking, that's odd, because we have a bell. Mr. Harlan came out and signed something on a clipboard, and the driver rolled out a covered stretcher. One of those gurneys with a long shape under a gray tarp. And the driver's hands were dirty like he'd been digging. And when he lifted the corner of the tarp for a second, I saw wood. Not a modern casket, not polished, just raw wood boards with old iron handles. And it made my stomach dip, because nobody orders that anymore unless they're doing some kind of reenactment thing, and we don't do reenactments. I walked closer, and Mr. Harlan held his hand out like a stop sign, without even looking at me, and he said, "Caleb, go back to the gate." And I said, "Is that a coffin?" And he said, "Go back to the gate," and his voice cracked on gate like it was a word he didn't want to say too loud. I did what he said, because again, paycheck. And because the way he looked right then wasn't normal. He looked like he was trying not to look behind him. I went back to the fence line, and as it got dark, the cemetery got quieter in a way that felt wrong, not peaceful, just like somebody turned the volume down on the world. Even the bugs went thin. The plastic flowers didn't rattle even when the wind moved the trees. I checked my phone for the time and it said one thing, and then I blinked and it said a few minutes earlier. And I thought my eyes were tired, so I shook the phone and checked again, and it jumped forward. And I told myself, the signal's bad up here. Phones do weird stuff on the ridge. And I laughed under my breath like I could laugh it off. Then I heard the first sound. And I need you to understand, it wasn't a scream. It wasn't some movie thing. It was a soft, steady scrape, like wood on stone, coming from somewhere inside the cemetery, not near the gate, deeper, toward the older section where the stones lean and the names are worn to smooth. I froze with my hand on the fence. And I listened. And the scrape stopped. And then there was a pause. And then it started again. Same rhythm, like someone dragging something heavy a short distance. Stopping, dragging again. I called out, "Hey!" And my voice came out too loud, like it startled me. And the scrape stopped again. And then I heard a footstep on gravel. Just one crunch. And it sounded close enough that I turned my head without thinking, expecting to see somebody on the path that runs along the inside of the fence. But there was nothing there, just fog and stones. I pulled my flashlight and I swept the beam along the fence line from my side. And the beam hit the chain on the gate and made it shine, and then it hit the nearest stones and made the letters pop for a second. Names I've seen 100 times, except one of them looked wrong. And that's the first wrong detail that got under my skin, because the stone near the path, the one with the little carved lamb at the top, it always says Ellen. It's been there longer than I've been alive. I know it because my mother used to point at it when we drove by and say, "That one's the little girl. Don't mess around up there." And in my flashlight beam, it didn't say Ellen. It said Caleb. It said my name. And it wasn't like someone scratched it in. It was carved, weathered, like it had been there. I stepped closer to the fence, and I leaned in until my breath hit the chain, and I tried to read it again, and my hands started to shake so bad the flashlight beam bounced, and I whispered, "No, man, no." And then I did the stupid thing, the thing you do when your brain wants to fix what it's seeing. I walked along the fence to the point where I could line up with that stone better, and I shined the light again, and it was Ellen again. Normal, worn, like it should. I stood there with my mouth open like a fool, and I looked away and looked back, and it stayed Ellen. And I told myself, okay, your eyes played a trick. Fog does that. You're tired, you're seeing shapes. And I laughed. I actually laughed, but it didn't feel like laughter. It felt like air leaking out of a tire. I called Mr. Harlan on my phone, and it rang and then went to voicemail. And I didn't leave one because, what do you say? "Hey, boss, I saw my own name on a headstone, And I looked back and it changed. So instead I texted him. Heard noises in cemetery. All good. And even as I typed all good, my fingers were clumsy. The scrape started again, closer now, but still inside the cemetery, moving along the path that curves behind the funeral home toward the older section. I stayed on the roadside like he told me, but my feet started to drift along the fence, tracking the sound without meaning to, like my body wanted to know. And I kept saying to myself, don't go in, don't go in, but I was already following, my flashlight cutting through fog that looked like it had weight, like it was hanging from the trees. I got to the corner where the fence meets the back of the funeral home, where there's that narrow strip of gravel between the building and the fence, and the sound stopped again, and for a second everything was silent, so silent I could hear the hum of the power lines. Then I heard something that made my stomach drop harder than the headstone thing, because it was a voice, low, right on the other side of the fence, and it said, "Caleb, open it." No accent I could place, no emotion, like someone reading a grocery list. And the way it said my name wasn't like someone calling me, it was like someone using a key. I spun around and shined the light, and there was nobody there, just fog and the fence and the dark road beyond, and my heart started banging like it was trying to get out. I backed up until my shoulder hit the building, and I said, "Who is that?" And my voice cracked, and the voice said again, "Caleb, open it." And then it added, "Please," like it was mocking manners. I called out, "I can't, cemetery's closed." And as soon as I said that, I felt stupid, because I wasn't talking to a customer. I was talking to nothing. I moved my flashlight beam down along the fence base, expecting to see feet, shoes, anything, and I saw nothing except damp leaves stuck to the bottom wire and one little patch of ground that looked disturbed like someone had been kneeling. I stood there, staring at that patch, and the voice stopped, and the scrape started again, but different now, not dragging, tapping, like nails on wood from far away. I jogged back to the gate, because the gate is where I'm supposed to be, because the gate is where I can see the road, because the gate is where I can leave. And I kept telling myself, you can leave, you can just leave, you can get in your car and go. But then I pictured Mr. Harlan and that folder and the missing paper and the way he said don't open the gate, and I don't know why, but that made me stay. I got to the gate and I checked the chain again, and the chain was still on, still locked, but the padlock was warm now, warm like someone had held it, and I jerked my hand back like it burned me. I looked up the road and there were no headlights, no houses close, just trees and fog, and that fence line stretching away with stones behind it like hunched backs. I tried to radio the other worker on the evening shift, a woman named Dana who does the front desk earlier, but sometimes she stays late to help the director, and my radio just hissed. I tried again, and a voice came through, but not Dana's voice. And it said, "Open it." Same flat tone. And then the radio clicked off, like someone turned it down. I stood there shaking so hard my teeth clicked, and I kept wiping my palm on my pants like I could wipe the feeling off. Time started doing that thing again. My phone would show one time and then show another, like it couldn't decide. And I started counting in my head to prove I wasn't losing it. 1, 2, 3. And when I got to 60, I checked my phone and it was earlier than when I started counting. And I swear to God, that's when I felt the first real fear. Not startled, not creeped out, real fear. Because you can argue with a noise, you can argue with fog, but you can't argue with time messing up right in your hand. I walked back toward the building because I needed light, I needed a door, I needed something solid. And when I rounded the corner toward the loading bay, the bay door was open. It was open wide enough to see the dark inside. I had checked it. I had locked it. I remember pulling on it. It was open, and there was that covered stretcher sitting halfway out like someone had been rolling it and stopped. "Harlan," and my voice came out small, and I stepped closer, and I could smell something from inside. Not decay, Not anything graphic, just that cold, wet earth smell like you get when you dig a hole. And it was strong, like someone had brought the cemetery inside the building. I shined my flashlight into the bay, and the beam landed on the tarp. And the tarp wasn't smooth anymore. It was dented and bunched, like something under it had shifted, like it wasn't lying flat the way a coffin should. I reached out and I touched the tarp with one finger, and it was damp, and my finger came away with dirt on it, red clay. There is no red clay in the funeral home. That clay is up on the ridge in the cemetery, in the older section where the ground is thin and rocky. I pulled my hand back and I backed away, and then I heard footsteps inside the building. Slow, not on the bay floor, deeper, like someone walking down the hallway that leads to the viewing rooms. I called again, "Mr. Harlan, you in there?" And the footsteps stopped. Then, from the cemetery side behind the building, I did not go inside. I did not touch the stretcher again. I turned and I ran. Man, I ran back to the gate like my body finally decided for me. And I kept thinking, get in the car, go. But when I got to the gate, my car wouldn't start. It cranked slow, like the battery was dragging through mud. And then it clicked and died. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel and the dashboard went dark, and the only light was my phone and the foggy glow of my flashlight beam outside. And I could see the gate in front of me and the chain, and I could see the cemetery behind it. Stones, barely visible, and I heard gravel crunching on the inside path, getting closer to the gate. Slow, steady steps. One crunch, pause, crunch, pause. Like whoever it was didn't need to hurry. I locked my car doors even though I was already locked inside a gate, and I held my phone up like it was a weapon. And I started whispering, "No, no, no." And I'm telling you, I'm not a praying guy. I'm not, but I started saying the only prayer I knew from when I was a kid, and my voice kept breaking because my throat was dry. The footsteps stopped right on the other side of the gate, inside the cemetery. And then there was silence. Then I saw the chain move. Not a lot, just a little twitch, like someone on the other side had touched it, and the padlock turned a fraction like it was being tested, and then it stopped. I sat frozen, watching, and my phone screen lit my hands, and I could see they were shaking like an engine idling. Then I heard a sound I can't forget, and it wasn't loud, it was soft. And that's worse. It was the sound of wood rubbing against metal, like something being slid along the fence, and it came from the cemetery side, moving along the gate, and I leaned forward and shined my flashlight through the bars. And in the beam I saw the edge of that coffin, the same raw wood boards, the same iron handle. It was upright, like someone was holding it standing on its end, and it was pressed close to the gate bars as if it was being shown to me. I swear to God there were no hands, no arms, nothing. Just the coffin standing there, balanced wrong, too steady. My stomach rolled and I gagged. And I slapped the car window down a crack because I needed air, and cold fog poured in like it was alive. And I heard that flat voice again, not from the radio this time, not from outside the fence, from right there in front of me. And it said, "You already signed." I said, "I didn't sign anything," and my voice sounded like a kid. The voice said, "You already signed." And then, like it was correcting itself, it said, "He already signed." And I don't know why that made me feel colder, but it did, because it was like it forgot who it was talking to. The coffin shifted, just a little, and I saw dirt spill from what should have been the bottom. Dirt fell upward, man, not floating. And it hit the gate bar and broke apart and dropped onto the ground on my side. I stared at that dirt. It was red clay. It was real. It was on my side of the gate now. The coffin leaned closer until the iron handle almost touched the bars. And then I heard that tapping from inside it, like fingernails, like someone knocking from the wrong side of wood. And my whole body locked up because my brain did the math without asking me. My brain said, If something is tapping from inside, something is inside. And then my brain said, no paperwork, no certificate. And then it said, missing, missing, missing. I started saying, stop, stop, stop. And I didn't even know who I was telling to stop. The coffin, the voice, my own head. Then the tapping stopped and the coffin went still. And for a long moment, nothing happened. I sat there in the dead car, fog in my lungs, watching that wooden edge in my flashlight beam. And my phone buzzed with a text. I looked down, and it was from Mr. Harlan. It said, do not open the gate. Then another text came right after, from the same number. And it said, if it asks, tell it you never saw the certificate. I stared at that, and my fingers went numb. I typed back, what is happening? And the message didn't go through. It just sat there. Then I got a call, and it was Dana's number on the screen. I answered because I needed a real human voice so bad, and I said, Dana, where are you? And she whispered, Caleb, are you at the gate? And I said, yes. And she said, do not look at the stones. And I said, what? And she said, do not read anything. Don't read any names. Just listen to me. And her voice sounded like she was crying without making noise. I said, Dana, it's not supposed to be out there. And I said, it's standing up by itself. And she said, Caleb, you have to leave. And I said, my car won't start. And she said, then don't let it know you're stuck. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, don't answer it. Don't argue. Don't bargain. Just stay quiet. And then I heard another voice on her end, low, too calm. And it said, is he there? And Dana made a sound like she covered the phone. And she whispered, it's in the office with me, Caleb. And I felt my stomach drop through the floor. Because if it was with her, and it was at the gate, then it wasn't one thing. Or it was one thing in two places. Or time was folding the way my phone was folding. And my head started spinning. Dana whispered, it came with the delivery. And I said, who did? And she said, I don't know. And then she said, the paperwork folder. It was full when it got here, and then it wasn't. And Mr. Harlan keeps checking the same spot like it's going to appear. And Caleb, he signed something, and he doesn't remember signing it. And I said, what did he sign? And she said, I think it was permission. And I said, permission for what? And she said, I don't know. I don't know. And then the other voice on her end said, put him on. And Dana started to sob quietly. And then the call cut out, just dead. I sat there staring at the phone, and the coffin at the gate made a slow creaking sound, like wood settling. And the tapping started again, faster now, like whoever was inside was getting impatient, and the fog thickened to the point where my flashlight beam looked like it was hitting a wall. I tried the car again, and it clicked and died. I tried again, and it didn't even click. My hands were sweating and cold at the same time. I looked out and the coffin was still there. But it was closer than it should be, like it had moved without the sound of gravel. And the iron handle was now pressed against the bars, and it made this tiny metallic squeal that went right into my teeth. I said out loud, I can't help you. And as soon as I said it, I wanted to swallow the words back, because I had acknowledged it, I had engaged. And the voice came, not from the coffin, not from outside, from the air itself, right by my ear inside the car. And it said, you already did. And my skin went hot like I'd been slapped. I turned my head so fast my neck popped, and there was nothing in the passenger seat. But the fog inside my car looked thicker than it should, like it was pooling in the corners. I squeezed my eyes shut and I started repeating, I'm telling you. I started repeating my own name and address, like I was trying to keep myself anchored. Caleb Mercer, Ridge Road, Larkspur Gap, and I kept saying it. And I opened my eyes, and my flashlight beam had shifted without me touching it. It was pointed not at the gate, but at the nearest headstone inside the cemetery. And in that beam, I saw my name again. Not Ellen, my name. Caleb Mercer. And below it were dates that didn't make sense, not because they were far off, but because the second date was blank, like the stone was waiting. I jerked the flashlight away and I yelled, "No." And my voice echoed off the fence like the cemetery swallowed it. The coffin made a dull thump against the bars. Once, like a person bumping a door with a shoulder. And then again, and I heard wood splinter a little, and I realized it was trying to get through without opening. And that thought made my body move on its own. I climbed out of the car. Man, I climbed out because staying inside felt like being in a trap, and I grabbed my flashlight and my radio and my keys, even though the keys were useless, and I backed away from the gate toward the funeral home, because there are doors there are lights, there are rooms, and as I backed, the coffin stopped thumping, and the tapping stopped, and everything went quiet again, like it was listening to where I went. I reached the loading bay and the bay door was still open, and the stretcher was gone. It was gone like it had never been there. The floor had tracks in the dust, fresh wheel tracks leading out toward the cemetery path behind the building. And the red clay dirt was smeared in a line, like someone dragged something heavy. I stood there in the bay light, shaking, and I did the only thing I could think to do. The hallway lights were on, but dim, and the air smelled like dirt and cold flowers. I walked toward the office and I called Dana's name, and I heard a small sound from the office like a chair scraping, and I pushed the office door open, and Dana was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall. Her knees pulled up, and her face was wet. And Mr. Harlan was at his desk, with the folder open, and he was holding a pen in his hand like he'd been writing for hours. And he looked up at me, like he didn't recognize me. I said, "The coffin is at the gate," and Mr. Harlan blinked slow and said, "What coffin?" And I felt my heart stutter because he said it so flat, like he truly didn't know what a coffin is. And Dana whispered, "Please, don't say it out loud." And I said, "It's out there. It's standing up. It's hitting the bars." And Mr. Harlan shook his head and said, "There was no delivery." And Dana made a noise like she was going to throw up, and she covered her mouth with her hand. I stepped closer to the desk and I pointed at the folder and I said, "You told me the paperwork was missing. You told me there was a delivery." And Mr. Harlan looked down at the folder like he'd never seen it, and he flipped it open and it was empty. Man, it was empty except for one sheet of paper, and he slid that one sheet toward me, and his fingers shook. I picked it up and it was a certificate form, but the name line was blank. The date line was smudged, like someone had rubbed it with a thumb, and the bottom had a signature. Mr. Harlan's signature. I recognized it because I've seen him sign checks, but it looked wrong. Like the letters were pressed too hard. Like someone forced his hand down. And there was one other mark on the paper, a red clay fingerprint, right where your thumb would go if you were holding it. I looked at him and I said, "You signed this." And he whispered, "I don't remember." And his eyes darted to the office window that faces the cemetery, and then away like he couldn't stand looking. Dana whispered, "It made him sign." And I said, "What do you mean made?" And she shook her head and said, "It kept asking. It kept asking the same question." And I said, "What question?" And she said, "Which way?" And she started to cry harder, and she said, "Which way down?" Mr. Harlan stood up so fast his chair fell back, and he said, "Enough." And then he walked to the office window, and he looked out toward the cemetery, like he was about to step outside, and Dana grabbed his pant leg and said, "Don't go," and he froze with his hand on the window frame. Instead, he turned and he went to the closet in the office where we keep spare flashlights and gloves, and he pulled out a set of old keys, not the building keys, and he held them in his palm like he hated them. He said, "I have to check the lower gate. I said, "We only have one gate." And he looked at me with this empty panic, and he said, "No, there's another one." Dana whispered, "Don't let him go alone." And I said, "I'm not going in there." And Mr. Harlan said, "You don't have to go in. The path runs along the fence." And then he said, "You're the guard. Guard it." And he pushed past me and went down the hallway toward the side door that opens to the path between the building and the cemetery fence. I followed because I couldn't let him walk out there by himself with whatever was happening. And Dana came behind me, wiping her face with her sleeve like a kid. And we stepped out into the fog, and the cold hit my lungs like a fist. The path along the fence was slick with damp leaves. Our flashlights made cones of light that didn't reach far because the fog swallowed them. Mr. Harlan walked fast, too fast, like he wanted to get it over with. I kept saying, "Slow down," and he didn't. We reached the back corner where the fence meets the tree line. And there's a little service gate there. Not for visitors, just for grounds crew. And it's usually chained from the inside. But Mr. Harlan held up those rusty keys, and his hand shook so hard he dropped them once, and they clinked on the gravel, and that sound echoed in the cemetery like a knock. He picked them up and he unlocked the little gate. And I said, "We are not going in." And he said, "We don't have to." And then he stepped through anyway. Dana grabbed my arm and whispered, "Caleb, please." And I don't know why my legs moved, but they did. And I stepped through too. Just a step. Just enough to see. Inside the cemetery, the fog was thicker, and the stones were closer together, and the ground felt softer under my boots, like it had been turned recently. Mr. Harlan shined his light toward the older section, and I saw fresh dirt, a long rectangle mound, like a grave that had been dug and filled in too fast. And next to it was that raw wood coffin lying on its side. Not standing now. On its side like someone dropped it, and there were scrape marks in the dirt leading from the coffin to the mound like it had been dragged. Dana made a sound like a whimper, and she said, "It's upside down." And I said, "How do you know?" And she pointed at the iron handles. The handles were on the side that was facing up, but they were placed wrong, like the coffin had been built for the handles to be on the other side. Like whoever made it assumed a different orientation. I stepped closer without meaning to, and Mr. Harlan said, "Don't touch it." And then he did touch it. He grabbed the coffin edge with his bare hand, and I saw his fingers come away with red clay, and he stared at it like it was blood even though it was just dirt. And he whispered, "It's backward." He looked at the mound, and then he looked at the coffin, and then he looked at the row of stones behind it, and his lips moved like he was reading names. Dana screamed, not loud, just a sharp breath scream, and she slapped her hand over her own mouth and shook her head. Harlan's eyes went unfocused, and he said my name, not to me, just into the fog. And then he said Dana's name, and then he said a name I didn't know, and then he said, "Which way down?" And his voice sounded like that flat voice now, like something used his mouth. I grabbed his shoulder and I said, "Stop it." And he jerked like I shocked him, and he blinked hard and looked at me like he woke up. He whispered, "We have to turn it." I said, "Turn what?" And he pointed at the coffin. He said, "It went in wrong." I said, "Nothing went in. It's right there." And he said, "No, listen." And he pointed at the mound. And then I heard it, the tapping, not on wood now, under the ground, faint, steady, like someone knocking from below the soil. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. The same rhythm as that delivery driver's knock, and my knees went weak. Dana whispered, "Do you hear it?" And I nodded because I couldn't speak. Mr. Harlan dropped to his knees beside the mound, and he pressed his ear to the dirt like a man listening for a train, and he whispered, "I'm sorry." And then the tapping stopped, and everything went silent again. And in that silence, I heard something else. A soft scrape, right behind us, like wood moving on gravel. I turned my light, and the coffin was not where it had been. It had shifted closer to the mound by itself, and it was now standing up on its end again, leaning slightly toward the open hole area, like it wanted to fall in. And I swear to God, I saw the lid seam flex like something inside pressed against it. Not a full bulge, just a tiny flex, enough to make my skin crawl. Dana backed up and tripped over a stone and caught herself. And she started whispering, "No, no, no." And Mr. Harlan stood up too fast and stumbled. And he said, "We have to open it." And I said, "We are not opening it." And he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "There's no certificate, Caleb. There's no name. There's no proof. If we don't open it, then it becomes true." And I didn't understand what he meant. And I said, "What becomes true?" And he said, "The stone." And he pointed. My flashlight beam swung where he pointed, and it landed on a headstone near the mound. And on that stone, in crisp letters like fresh carving, was my name again. All 3 stones looked older than they should, edges worn, but the letters were sharp. I stared, and my brain refused to accept it. I stepped closer, and as I did, the fog thinned for a second, like someone drew a curtain, and I saw the row behind those stones. And it was the same 3 names again, repeated. Same spacing, same stones, like a pattern printed down the hill. And then farther back, the same 3 names again. And my stomach turned, because it wasn't just that my name appeared, it was that it appeared with impossible precision, repeating like somebody stamped it. Dana started to sob, and she said, "It's making a map." And Mr. Harlan whispered, "Which way down?" And his voice slipped again, flat and wrong. I grabbed Dana's hand and I said, "We are leaving." And I pulled her toward the service gate, and Mr. Harlan followed like he was sleepwalking. And behind us, the coffin made that wood on gravel scrape, moving, keeping pace. Not fast, just steady, like it knew we couldn't outrun it inside the cemetery. We got to the little gate, and I shoved it open, and we stumbled out onto the path along the fence. And I slammed the gate and yanked the chain, and my hand shook so bad I fumbled the lock, and Dana kept whispering, "Don't look, don't read, don't read." And Mr. Harlan stood there staring through the fence into the fog like he could still see the stones. I finally got the lock through and snapped it shut, and the moment it clicked, the tapping started again, louder, from inside the coffin, and the coffin slammed against the fence from the other side so hard the wire rattled. Dana screamed and ran toward the building, and I grabbed Mr. Harlan by the sleeve and dragged him because he wasn't moving. We got inside the funeral home, and Dana locked the side door and slid down against it, shaking. Mr. Harlan walked to the office like a man on a string, sat at his desk, opened the folder, and started writing on the blank certificate like his life depended on it. I stood there yelling at him, "Stop! What are you doing?" And he didn't answer, his pen scratching hard enough to tear paper. Dana whispered, "He's giving it a name." And I said, "Why would he do that?" And she whispered, "Because it keeps asking which way down, and if he names it, he thinks he can choose." I'm telling you, I didn't understand then, I barely understand now. But I saw something on his face, a kind of desperate logic. Like if you label a thing, you can control it. Like if you fill in a blank, it stops the blank from filling you. Mr. Harlan suddenly stopped writing and stared at the paper like it shocked him. He whispered, "It's not staying." Dana and I leaned in. The name line, where he had been writing, was blank again. The ink wasn't smeared. It wasn't erased. It was just gone, like the paper never held it. Mr. Harlan made a broken sound, half laugh, half cry, and he said, "It won't accept it." Then the building lights flickered, once, twice, and went steady. The office window that faces the cemetery fogged over from the outside like someone breathed on it. And on that fogged glass, letters appeared, traced clean, and they spelled which way down. Dana covered her eyes and started repeating, "Don't answer, don't answer." And Mr. Harlan stood up and walked to the window like he had to. Like the question pulled him. I grabbed his arm and said, "Don't." And he looked at me with this hollow calm and he said, "Caleb, it already knows." Then there was a loud knock at the front door of the funeral home. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Pause. Same rhythm as the tapping under the dirt. Same rhythm as the delivery driver's knock. And my whole body went cold, because the front door is on the roadside, not the cemetery side. And I hadn't heard any car. No gravel crunch outside. Nothing. Just the knock like it had always been standing there. Dana screamed. And Mr. Harlan whispered, "Don't let it in the building. It's already in the building." And then I realized how stupid that sounded, because I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was asking and asking and asking. The knocking stopped. Then the phone on Mr. Harlan's desk rang. It was the old landline, not connected to any modern system. It's mostly there for show, but it rang, and Mr. Harlan stared at it like a snake. Dana whispered, "Don't pick up." And I said, "Who would be calling?" And Mr. Harlan slowly lifted the receiver, like he couldn't help it. And he held it to his ear. His face changed. Man, his face went slack. And he said, and then he said, "Yes." And then he said, "Yes." I shouted, "Hang up." And he didn't. He said, "Which way down?" And his voice matched that flat voice so perfectly, I felt like I was going to faint. Dana grabbed the receiver cord and yanked it, and it ripped out of the wall with a pop, and the ringing stopped. And for a second, there was silence. Then, from outside, from the cemetery side, came the sound of something heavy being dragged along the fence. Scraping, 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 getting closer to the gate. And I knew it was bringing that coffin back to the gate. But also, I knew it didn't need to, because it was already writing on our window, already speaking through our phones, already moving our locks warm and cold like they were toys. Dana whispered, "We have to go." And I said, "My car won't start." And she said, "Take mine." And I said, "Where's your keys?" And she said, "I don't know." And she started patting her pockets like a person who forgot their own body. Mr. Harlan stumbled toward the front door like he wanted to open it, and I grabbed him and pushed him back, and I yelled, "Sit down!" And I don't yell at people. I'm not that guy. But I yelled, and he looked at me like he recognized me for a split second. And he whispered, "It wants a direction." He pointed toward the cemetery. He said, "It went in backward." He said, "If it goes in backward, it comes out." I said, "Comes out of what?" And he whispered, "Out of the ground, out of the stones, out of the names." And then he started to cry, big shaking sobs that made his tie swing. And he kept saying, "I didn't mean to sign." And Dana slid down the wall and hugged her knees and rocked like a child. The dragging outside stopped. Then there was a soft click from the office desk. Mr. Harlan's folder, the empty folder, was now full again. Papers stacked neatly like they had always been there. Mr. Harlan's folder, and our well-to-be. Mr. Harlan's folder. Harlan stared at it and stopped crying mid-sob like he got choked. He opened it with trembling hands and he pulled out a certificate, fully filled in, name, date, everything typed clean. And the name was not mine, not Dana's, not his. It was a name I did not know, just a plain name, and the date was this year, and the signature at the bottom was Mr. Harlan's. Neat, normal, like he signed it calmly. He whispered, "It made it real." Dana whispered, "Don't read it." And I realized too late, I had already read the name. And that's when my phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out without thinking. And on my screen was a photo I did not take. A photo of that raw wood coffin lying in the grave, but the photo was taken from above as if someone stood on nothing looking down. And in the photo, the coffin was upside down, lid against the dirt, and on the underside, scratched into the wood from inside out, were long scrape marks like a person dragging fingernails. And under those marks, written in shaky lines, was my name. I dropped the phone like it burned me. It clattered on the office floor, and when I picked it up again, the photo was gone. My gallery was normal. No new images. But my hands were filthy with red clay. I looked down, and my work shirt hem had a fresh smear of that clay, right over the old stain. Like the place was marking me on purpose. Mr. Harlan stood up abruptly, wiped his face, and said, "We have to bury it the right way." And Dana screamed, "No." And I said, "We are not doing anything in that cemetery tonight." And he looked at me with this dead seriousness, and he said, "Then it will keep asking." He grabbed the certificate and he walked toward the back door. Dana grabbed his sleeve and begged, "Please, please." And he shook her off and said, "You don't understand. It's already written us into the ground." And I grabbed my flashlight and I followed, because I couldn't let him go alone, and because a part of me thought, stupidly, that if we did the thing, if we answered the question, it would stop. Like a dog that won't stop barking until you let it outside. We went out the side door onto the path along the fence, and the fog was so thick the world felt like it ended 2 feet away. Harlan held the certificate out in front of him like it was a pass. Dana stayed by the door, crying, and I heard her whisper, "Don't leave me." And I wanted to stay with her. I swear I did. But my feet followed him. We got to the little service gate again, and the chain was already undone. Harlan didn't react. He just pushed the gate open and walked in. I hesitated, and I heard the gravel crunch behind me on the path outside the fence, slow steps, and I turned and saw nothing. But I felt the certainty of being watched by nothing visible, like eyes without faces pressed against the fog. And I stepped into the cemetery because standing between it and the building felt worse than stepping in. We walked toward the fresh mound, and the tapping under the dirt started as soon as we got close. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. Steady. Patient. "Mister." Harlan knelt and started digging with his bare hands like a man gone. I said, "Stop, you can't." And he didn't answer. The dirt was wet and clumped. He dug fast, faster than hands should dig, and I shined my light and saw the outline of a lid, wood under soil, and my stomach turned. He cleared dirt until he could grab the edge, and then he pulled, and the lid came up with a sucking sound like the earth didn't want to let go. The smell that rose wasn't rot. It wasn't gore. It was colder than that. It was like opening a freezer full of wet clothes, and it made my eyes water. Inside the grave was the raw wood coffin. But it was wrong. Man, it was wrong, because it was oriented so the lid was against the bottom, like it had been placed upside down, and the iron handles were buried in the dirt, and the bottom boards were on top. And on those bottom boards were scratch marks, long, frantic grooves. And they were fresh, the wood splinters still pale. "Mister," Harlan whispered, "See?" And he held the certificate over it like he was presenting it to the coffin. He said, "This is yours." And the tapping stopped. Then, from somewhere behind us in the fog, came a soft voice, the flat one, and it said, "Which way down?" And Mr. Harlan answered, without looking. He said, "This way," and he pointed. I grabbed his arm and said, "Don't answer it." And he shook me off like I was nothing. Then the ground under my boots shifted, just slightly, like settling. And I lost balance for a second. And when I steadied myself, the cemetery around us looked different. The stones were arranged differently. The tree line was closer. The path we came in on was not where it had been. I swung my flashlight around in a panic, and the beam hit headstones I did not recognize. Stones with names carved too clean. And one of them, right near my feet, had my name again. And the date line was no longer blank. It had a date. A date that was this morning. I felt my throat close. I stumbled backward, tripping over a stone that should not have been there. And I fell hard on my tailbone, and my flashlight beam went wild. And in that wild beam, I caught a glimpse of the coffin moving, not being moved. Moving. The coffin in the grave lifted slightly, like it was being pushed from below, like something under it wanted to flip it. And Mr. Harlan leaned over it, hands out, trying to hold it in place like you'd hold a trash can lid in a storm. And his face was lit from below by my flashlight, and he looked terrified and calm at the same time. He shouted, "No." And then he shouted, "This way down, this way down," like he was correcting a machine. The fog thickened around his head, and for a second I couldn't see his legs, like he was floating above the grave. The flat voice said again, "Which way down?" And this time it sounded like it came from 3 different directions at once. From the stones, from the trees, from under the dirt, and Mr. Harlan screamed, "This way." And he grabbed the coffin edge and pulled, and the coffin flipped in the grave. Slow, grinding, wood scraping against earth. And as it turned, I saw inside it for a split second. Not a body, not gore, just darkness and dirt, and those scratch marks on the lid from the inside. And in that darkness, I heard a breath that wasn't mine. A wet inhale like someone waking up. Mr. Harlan lost his grip and fell forward, and his hands hit the inside of the coffin, and he jerked back like he touched something cold and alive. Staring into the coffin like he saw his own face in there. The world went silent, even the wind stopped. Then, Mr. Harlan whispered my name, softly, like apology. And he stepped into the grave without climbing, just stepped down like the ground accepted him. I scrambled to my feet screaming, "No, no, no." And I ran to the edge and reached for him. And my fingers grabbed his sleeve. And his sleeve tore. And he slid farther down, and the coffin lid shifted by itself. Closing, slow, and Mr. Harlan's hand was on the edge for a second, fingers splayed. And then it slipped inside, and the lid shut with a dull thud. And there was no banging, no struggle, nothing, just the lid closed like it always belonged closed. I stood there shaking so hard I couldn't breathe. The fog around the grave thickened until I couldn't see the coffin anymore. Just the outline. And then the outline wasn't there. Just a filled hole. Dirt smooth like it had been packed down for days. My flashlight beam hit the dirt, and there were no footprints, no disturbed soil, nothing to prove we dug it up. And my head spun because my body remembered digging and falling and grabbing his sleeve. But the ground looked untouched. I looked at my hands and they were clean. No clay, no dirt. And that made me start crying because it meant the place could erase me whenever it wanted. Then, from the stones behind me, came the crunch of gravel. Slow steps. And I spun and shined my flashlight, and I saw the coffin standing by itself again, upright between 2 headstones, closer than it should be, and on its wood surface, where there had been no writing before, there were now 3 sets of letters carved like old weathered names. One was Mr. Harlan, one was Dana, one was mine, and under mine, the date line was still there, and the end date was blank again, like it had changed its mind, like it was waiting for me to decide. The flat voice whispered, "Which way down?" and it sounded right behind my ear. I did not answer. I ran. I ran out of that cemetery like my legs were on fire. I ran toward where I thought the service gate was, and the fence kept going and the gate wasn't there. And I ran along the fence line, flashlight bouncing, and the stones inside the cemetery shifted in my peripheral like they were sliding on wheels. And I kept hearing my own footsteps behind me, even when I stopped, and I kept smelling that cold earth like it was in my nose forever. I finally found the gate after what felt like forever, but my phone said only minutes had passed, and then it said hours had passed, and then it said the same time again, like it was looping. I burst out onto the path behind the funeral home, and I almost fell because the world outside the cemetery felt too open, too thin. Dana was at the side door, still there, eyes huge. And she grabbed me and screamed, "Where is he?" And I couldn't answer because I didn't know how to say it without making it true. I just kept shaking my head, and she started hitting my chest with her fists, like a kid. Not hard, just desperate, and she kept saying, "No, no, no," and then the lights in the building went out, all at once, and the cemetery behind the fence went silent like it was satisfied. We stumbled to the front lot, and my car still wouldn't start, and Dana's keys were in the ignition of her car like they had always been there, even though she swore she didn't have them. And we got in and she drove with the headlights cutting through fog. And as we pulled away, the cemetery gate, the big visitor gate, swung open by itself and then swung shut again, slow, like a nod. Dana took me home without speaking. When we got to my place, she sat in her car with the engine running and she stared straight ahead and she whispered, "Don't ever drive that ridge again. Don't ever say his name near stones." And I said, "Okay." And then she whispered, "If you see your name, don't read the dates." And I said, "Okay." And she finally looked at me, and her eyes were dead tired, and she said, "It's going to keep asking. Caleb, it asks until somebody answers." And then she drove off. The next day, the funeral home called and left a message saying Mr. Harlan had resigned unexpectedly, and there would be a temporary director coming in. And they thanked staff for patience during the transition. Like a normal office email, like he just quit, like he didn't slide into the ground in front of me. And when I tried to tell myself I dreamed it, I went to wash my work shirt because I needed something concrete. And that stain on the hem, the old stain I was mad about, it had changed shape. It looked like a handprint now. Fingers stretched long, pressed in red clay that wasn't from my yard. And no matter how much I scrubbed it, it wouldn't come out. I went back up to the Ridge Road 2 days later in daylight because I needed to see the cemetery and prove to myself it was normal. And the gate was locked and chained like always. And the stones looked like stones. And I stood on the roadside like a coward, and I forced myself to look at the lamb headstone. And it said Ellen like it should. And I almost laughed from relief. And then I looked one stone over, and it said Caleb again. And I blinked, and it said Ellen again. And my stomach dropped because it wasn't a one-time trick. It was a choice the place could make. Show me. Hide it. Show it. Hide it. I drove away so fast, my tires spun on gravel. Since then, every time I pass any cemetery, even a little one behind a church, my chest tightens, and I turn the radio up because silence feels like that question forming. And I don't take the Ridge Road at all anymore. I go the long way around town like an idiot and people tease me for it, and I let them because I would rather be teased than be asked. Dana quit the next week. She told someone she was moving to help her aunt, but I saw her once at the grocery store, and she wouldn't look at me. She just shook her head like we had an agreement not to carry it into fluorescent light. I tried to look up Mr. Harlan online. Obituary, news, anything. And there's nothing. No resignation note. No goodbye. No memorial. The funeral home has a new director who smiles too much and acts like he's always been there. And when I went in to pick up my last paycheck, the office wall where the window faces the cemetery had been painted, fresh white paint, and the old landline phone was gone. And the folder shelf was empty, like they removed the whole idea. I asked the new director if Mr. Harlan left any forwarding info, and he looked at me like I said a name he didn't recognize, and he said, "Who?" And my mouth went dry, and I said, "Never mind. The worst part, man, the part I can't explain, is that sometimes at night, when my house is quiet and I'm trying to sleep, 3 taps in the pipes, pause, and my brain snaps awake, and I'm back at that gate, with the coffin upright and the fog in my lungs and the padlock warm in my hand. And sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I swear I hear a voice in my room that isn't loud but it's close, and it says, "Which way down?" like it's a question you can't ignore forever. I hold my breath until I feel like my chest will burst because I'm scared if it hears me breathe, it will know I'm here. That's why I'm in my car right now by this cemetery gate in a different part of town. Because I thought if I drove somewhere else and faced it like a man, maybe it would stop haunting my house. But now I'm here, and the battery is dying, and the fog is back, and I can hear plastic flowers rattling even though there is no wind, and I can see the fence line and the stones behind it, and I'm trying not to read any names, but my eyes keep catching on letters like hooks, and I swear to God I just saw my own name on a marker near the path running along the fence, and when I looked again it wasn't there, and my hands are shaking so bad I can barely hold this phone, and I'm telling you, dude, I don't know what it wants. I don't know what happens when you answer. I don't know if Mr. Harlan answered, or if the place answered through him. I just know the question isn't done. It doesn't stop at one cemetery. It doesn't stop at one gate. It follows like a smell on your clothes. It sticks in your mouth and behind your eyes, and every time I see a headstone now, I feel like it's a blank waiting to be filled. If you're listening and you work near a graveyard, or you visit one, or you cut through because it's quicker, don't read stones you don't have to read. Don't say names out loud. And if you ever hear someone ask you, "Which way down?" like it's a normal question, like they're asking directions, you do not answer them. You hear me? You do not answer. Because I think the moment you answer, it stops being a question and it becomes a decision, and I don't think you get to take it back. I won't stand by a cemetery gate at night again. My name's Caleb Renaud. I'm from Pine Hollow, Louisiana, and I work as a night security guard for a small funeral home that sits right next to the old cemetery. Everybody pretends they do not notice. Listen, I am not doing this for attention. Man, I am doing this because if I do not say it out loud, I think it is going to sit in my chest until it stops my heart, and I am saying it into a cracked phone at 3 in the morning, with my car idling like it is coughing itself awake, and the battery light keeps flickering like a warning sign, and I am parked right outside the cemetery gate because I cannot make myself drive past it yet. I swear to God I tried twice, and my hand started shaking on the steering wheel like I was freezing, and it is not even cold out here. It is Louisiana, it is wet and heavy, and everything smells like damp grass and old mud. I keep looking at the gate in my mirror, like something is going to step out between the bars. And I know how that sounds, dude. I know. But listen, you have to hear the whole thing, the way it happened, the boring parts too, because the boring parts are what make it feel so wrong now. Yesterday, or no, wait, it was technically the day before yesterday, because it is after midnight now. So it was Monday, December 8th, I checked my phone when I punched in and it said 6:12 p.m. And I remember because I had grease on my thumb from the food I ate in my truck and I smeared it across the screen when I swiped. And it made a dull streak that I wiped on my jeans like an idiot. Breakfast that morning was nothing special. 2 eggs and toast. And I burned the toast a little because I was half asleep, and the toaster in my apartment pops late, and I put too much hot sauce on the eggs, and it made my eyes water. And I was wearing this faded gray work shirt with the stitched patch from the funeral home, and it has a dark coffee stain right at the bottom near my ribs from when I spilled coffee on myself in the truck last week, and it will not come out no matter what I do, and that stain matters because I kept rubbing at it later. Like I could scrub the night off me the same way, and I could not. My shift is usually quiet. The funeral home closes around 5, the last families leave, the lights in the chapel go off, and it is just me and the building and the cemetery next door, and my job is to watch the gate, keep people from sneaking in, keep kids from messing around, keep the place from getting broken into. And sometimes I walk the fence line with a flashlight and I check the side doors and I make sure nothing is leaking. That is it. I do not dig graves. I do not touch bodies. I do not do embalming. I just sit in that little security room by the loading area and I watch cameras and I do rounds. The cemetery itself is small town small, the kind where half the headstones lean like tired teeth. The names are worn soft from rain, and there are plastic flowers that rattle when the wind comes up. And you can tell which ones are new because the colors still look loud, and which ones have been there forever because they are sun-bleached into this sad pastel. Most nights it is nothing but the sound of distant cars and the buzz of the streetlight by the gate and the crunch of gravel under my boots when I do a round. I am telling you that because I have walked that place 100 times, and it has never felt like this. It started normal. I ate a gas station sandwich for dinner in my truck at 5:48. I remember because the receipt was still in my cup holder when all this went down. Turkey and cheese, too much mustard, and I drank a warm soda because I forgot to restock my cooler. I pulled into the lot, waved at the day staff leaving, sat down in my chair, and I did my little routine. Checked the cameras, checked the doors, wrote the time in the logbook. Nothing unusual. Around 7:30 the air got thick like it does when fog is coming, but not the pretty kind, the kind that makes everything look close and far at the same time, like the distance is lying to you. The damp came up off the ground and the stones started looking darker, like wet shoulders. I remember thinking, great, another night of water in the gutters. Then at 8:11 my supervisor called me. I know the exact time because it popped up on the security computer when I noted it. And I only noted it because his calls usually mean something is wrong. He said, "Caleb, you need to do me a favor tonight." I said, "What kind of favor?" He said, "Just keep an eye out. We had a family call earlier asking about a child's plot, and there have been reports of people hopping the fence on the back side. So just do your rounds like normal, but pay attention near the little section by the oak." I asked him which oak, because there are a bunch, and he said, "You know the one by the small markers. The one near that child stone with the lamb on it." I did not like that he said it that way, like that stone is famous. I said, "Okay," and he said, "And if you see anything disturbed, call me." I said, "Is somebody coming tonight?" He said, "No, just keep an eye out." Then he hung up. I sat there for a minute staring at the phone like it was going to explain itself. Child stone with the lamb. I knew exactly which one he meant, and I had not thought about it in a long time, because I do my best not to look too close at the kids' stones. Man, I do not know why, it just makes my stomach twist. They are small, the dates are close together, and you cannot help doing the math in your head. I stood up, got my flashlight, and went out for my first long round. The fog had gotten thicker, and it had this weird taste to it, like pennies, like metal. I am not making that up. I tasted it on the back of my tongue. My boots sank a little into the grass because the ground was damp. The gravel path by the fence crunched loud, and the sound carried farther than it should have, like the air was empty for it. I did my normal route past the older section, past the family plots with iron fences, past the row where the flags are because there are a couple veterans buried there, and then I turned toward the little section by the oak. The oak he meant is a big one that leans toward the cemetery like it is listening, and it blocks the street light, so that corner is always darker. The small markers are there, and the stones are closer together, and the grass is thinner, like it does not want to grow. I swung my light across them, and everything looked normal at first, just wet stone, plastic flowers, a little mud. Then I saw the child stone. It is small, white, with a carved lamb, and it has a flat border around it like a little frame. The thing that caught me first was the flowers. There were fresh flowers there, not plastic, real ones. White little ones bundled tight, like someone had just put them there that day. That is not impossible, but it was late, and the funeral home was closed, and nobody had come through the gate because I would have seen them, and the back fence line is tough to climb without making noise, and the ground near there is soft, you would leave footprints. I leaned closer and shined my light down. The soil inside the little border looked darker than the soil around it, like it had been turned, not dug, not a hole, but disturbed, like someone had pushed a shovel in and lifted, then patted it back down. I stood there, holding my breath, and I remember thinking, this is probably nothing. Maybe the family came earlier and did some touch-up. Maybe someone kicked mud in. Then I saw something that made my skin go cold. There were boot prints, not mine. These were different, deeper, like heavier. And they came from the path and stopped right in front of the child stone. 2 feet planted, like a person stood there a long time, and then the prints turned and went back the way they came. But the fog had started to bead water on the grass, and the edges of the prints looked softened, like they were older than a few minutes. And the weird part was there were no other prints around them, no scattered steps, no wandering, just straight there, straight back, like a person walked with purpose, stood, then left. I took my flashlight and scanned for the next set of prints leading away, and I could not find them beyond that immediate area. It was like the ground forgot them 2 yards out. I told myself, okay, the dew is filling them in. You are being dramatic. I took a picture on my phone. The screen cracked across the top, and when I tapped the camera button, the flash did this weak blink because my battery was low. I looked at the photo, and it was blurry. The fog made it look like nothing. I tried again, held my hand steady, and got a better one. Then I backed up and walked the perimeter of that section, shining the light into the fog, listening. No voices, no footsteps, no movement, just that wet hush. And somewhere off in the distance, a dog barked once and stopped, like it regretted it. I went back to the security room and wrote it down. 8:47 p.m. Disturbed soil near child stone. Footprints present. I did not call my supervisor yet because I did not want to sound stupid. I thought, do another round, see if anything changes. Around 10, the fog got even thicker, and the cameras started looking like they had a film over them. The streetlight by the gate was a fuzzy halo. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the little machine, and it tasted burnt, and I spilled a little on the same stain area of my shirt, and I got annoyed, like I needed that, like I needed more brown on gray. I sat down, watched the monitors, and I swear I saw something move on the cemetery camera, the one aimed at the oak corner. It was not a person. It was more like a shift in darkness, like a shadow slid behind a stone. I leaned forward. The camera feed fuzzed, then cleared. Nothing there. My heart was thumping like I had run. I told myself it was the fog. It was the camera. It was my tired brain. I stood up and did another round anyway. I walked slower this time, listening to my own footsteps. The gravel was louder than before, and the sound echoed off the stones like the cemetery was a small room. When I got near the oak corner, the air felt heavier, and there was that metallic taste again. The child stone was there, the flowers still there, and the soil looked more disturbed than before, like someone had pressed down on it with their hands, leaving slight dents. The boot prints were still there, but now there was something else. A tool, a small spade, the kind you use for planting, was leaning against the border of the child stone, handle up like someone set it there carefully. I froze. That tool was not mine. We do not keep gardening tools in the cemetery at night. The grounds crew has their shed, and it is locked, and I had the key on my ring. Nobody should have access. I picked up the spade slowly, like it might be hot. The handle had no markings, plain wood. And here is the part that makes me sound crazy, but I am telling you exactly. The metal blade was clean, too clean. If someone had used it to turn that wet soil, it would have mud on it, at least a smear. It looked like it had been rinsed. I held it in my hand and listened. The cemetery was quiet, but not normal quiet. It felt like everything was holding its breath. I turned in a slow circle, shining my flashlight. The fog swallowed the beam after 10 feet. I could not see the fence line anymore, even though it was close. I called out, "Hey, this is private property. You need to leave." My voice sounded wrong in the fog, like it came from someone else's mouth. No answer. I walked back toward the path, then stopped because I realized something that made my stomach drop. The boot prints were new again. Deeper, crisper, like the person had just stood there. But I had been watching cameras. I had been inside. I would have seen someone come in, unless they came through the back. But even then, I would have heard it. The fence rattles if you touch it. The gate squeaks if you open it. I looked down at the prints and saw a thin line of water in one of them, like it had started to fill, then been displaced, like someone had just stepped in it after it began filling. That meant the prints were fresh. That meant someone was here. I gripped the spade tighter. I started walking back to the security room. Fast, but not running, because I did not want to trip. And as I walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, and every time I did, I felt like I was looking just a second too late. Like something had been there and slid away. At 10:19, I called my supervisor. He answered on the second ring, like he was waiting. I said, "Someone is messing around by that child stone. There was disturbed soil earlier, and now there is a spade left there. And the footprints are fresh." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes, I am holding the spade right now." He said, "Did you see anyone?" I said, "No, but they have to be there or they were." He said, "Okay, listen, lock up the gate. Do not go back there alone again tonight, and I will come by in the morning with the grounds guy, and we will take a look." I said, "Should I call the police?" He said. I said, "Okay, but what about the grave?" He said, "Just stay inside and keep cameras on it. If you see someone, you call me again." Then he said something that stuck to me like wet cloth. He said, "Caleb." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Do not touch the stone." I said, "I did not touch it." He said, "Good." Then he hung up. I stood there in the security room with the spade in my hand, and I remember thinking, why would he say that? Why would he say it like that? I put the spade in the corner by the desk, like I was storing evidence. And I watched the camera aimed at that section. The fog made it hard. Every once in a while, the image would fuzz like static, then clear. Around 11:06, I saw the weirdest thing. The flowers on the child stone moved, not like wind. They shifted, like someone lifted them and set them back down. The bundle rose, maybe an inch, then settled. The camera did not shake. Nothing else moved. The grass did not ripple. The branches of the oak did not sway. Only those flowers, up and down like a hand. I leaned close to the screen, and my mouth went dry. I grabbed my flashlight and my keys, and I stood up like an idiot. I was going to go out there. Then my phone rang again. It was my supervisor. He said, "You seeing it?" I said, "Seeing what?" He said, "On the camera." I said, "Yes, I saw the flowers move." He said, "Okay, good. So it is not just you." That made my knees feel weak. I said, "What is going on?" He said, "Listen, I did not want to say it on the phone earlier, but that plot has been an issue before." He said, "Families complain. They say things look different. They say they hear stuff when they visit. They say the dirt settles wrong." I said, "You mean like superstition?" He said, "I mean like complaints that cost money, and we do not need that." I said, "Someone is out there." He said, "No, Caleb, there is not." I said, "You just said you saw it too." He said, "I saw movement. That does not mean a person." Then he went quiet for a second, and I could hear his breathing, like he was thinking hard. He said, "Do you know why the family called earlier?" I said, "No." He said, "Because they want an inspection." I said, "Inspection of what?" He said, "Of the vault." He said, "Yes." I felt my throat tighten. I said, "Why?" He said, "Because they believe the coffin is not there." I did not say anything for a second because my brain stalled like a car in mud. Then I said, "That is not possible." He said, "Because they say they have never felt like it was right, and recently someone told them a story, and it got in their heads, and now they want it checked." I said, "Are you telling me they think the grave is empty?" He said, "Yes." I looked at the camera again. The flowers were still. The fog rolled like a slow ocean. I said, "Okay. So kids messed around. They heard a rumor. They are trying to scare them." He said, "Maybe." Then he said, "Caleb, you have to promise me you are not going back out there tonight." I said, "Okay." He said, "Lock your door." I said, "It is locked." He said, "Good." Then he hung up again. I sat down and I tried to laugh at myself. Like, this is ridiculous. You are getting spooked by a camera and a grave rumor. The coffee machine clicked like it was thinking. At 12:43, I went to the bathroom in the back hallway, and when I came back, the camera feed for the oak section was black. Not fuzzy. Black. The other cameras were fine. I tapped the monitor, checked the cable connection, checked the power. It was on. The camera should have been working. It was like the lens was covered. I felt my heart start pounding again. I called my supervisor. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I did not leave a message because I could not even find words. I stood there staring at the black square on the screen. My mind kept making pictures, like someone standing there with their hand over the camera, or a bag pulled over it, or something leaning close. I told myself, "Do not go out there. Do not be stupid." Then the phone in the security room rang, the landline we almost never use. I jumped so hard my elbow hit the desk. I picked it up and said, "Hello." All I heard was breathing. Slow, close, not static, not wind. Breathing, like someone holding the receiver to their mouth. I said, "Hello, who is this?" The breathing continued, then a voice. Quiet. Not a kid voice, not an old man voice, just a voice that sounded flat, like it had no place to come from. Said, "You can look if you want." I swear to God. Those exact words. "You can look if you want." My skin prickled. I said, "Who is this?" The voice said, "You can look if you want," and then the line went dead. I stood there, holding the receiver, and my mind did that thing where it tries to grab onto normal explanations like a drowning person grabbing weeds. I thought, prank call, wrong number. Someone at the funeral home messing with me, but the funeral home was closed. Nobody else had the landline number except staff. I looked at the monitor again. Still black. I sat the receiver down slow, like it would bite me, and I grabbed my flashlight and my keys, and I did the thing I told myself I would not do. Man, I walked out. I told myself I was going to check the camera. That is all. Just the camera. Not the grave. Just fix the feed. The fog outside was thick enough that the streetlight looked like a pale coin in milk. I kept my flashlight pointed down, because when I pointed it ahead, the beam just hit fog and came back at me like a wall. My breath sounded loud inside my ears. I walked past the chapel side, past the loading doors, toward the edge where the cemetery begins. The gate to the cemetery was still locked, like I had locked it earlier, but we have a small side access for staff, and I unlocked it and stepped through. The air changed immediately, like the cemetery air is always a little colder, even in Louisiana, like the ground holds a different kind of damp. I walked toward the oak corner. The fog got denser the closer I got, and the metallic taste came back, stronger, like I had a penny under my tongue. I remember thinking, you are going to see some kid, and you are going to yell, and that will be the end. I remember thinking that because it makes me sick now, how sure I was that normal was waiting just ahead. When I got within 20 feet of the child stone, my flashlight beam caught something tall, right in front of the camera pole. For a split second, I thought it was a person. My whole body locked. Then the beam steadied, and I saw it was the cemetery ladder, the aluminum one, leaned up against the pole like someone had used it to climb. That ladder is kept in the grounds shed. The shed is locked. I had the key. I had not been to the shed. I stared at the ladder and my mouth went dry. I turned and shined my light toward the shed building in the far corner. The lock on the shed door was hanging open. Not broken. Open. Like someone unlocked it and left. I felt like my stomach dropped through my boots. I did not hear any footsteps. I did not hear any fence rattle. The fog muffled everything. I walked closer to the child stone because I could not. Man, I do not know how else to say it. It was like my body was being pulled by the need to see. The flowers were gone. The fresh white bundle was not there anymore. The border around the stone was clean, like someone had swept it. The soil inside the border was flattened. No disturbed patches, no prints, like none of it ever happened. I stood there, breathing hard, shining my light on the stone, and the lamb carving looked too bright in the beam. I told myself, maybe someone came and cleaned it. Maybe staff. Maybe my supervisor lied and came early. Then I looked at the spade marks on the ground where I had seen them, and they were gone too. The grass looked smooth. The mud looked undisturbed. The camera housing was tilted like it had been forced. The lens cover was not on. The wires were exposed. And the weirdest part was, the screws that hold the cover were sitting in a neat little line on top of the child stone's flat base. Like someone placed them there, like an offering. I did not touch the stone. I remembered his warning. But the screws were on it, and they were real, and they had mud on them. And they were cold when I held my hand near them, like cold air, like a fridge. My hand started shaking so hard I could barely aim my flashlight. I backed up, and my boot hit something. I looked down. It was the bundle of white flowers, but it was not fresh anymore. It looked waterlogged, crushed, like it had been in a ditch for a week. I picked it up without thinking. And when I did, a smell came off it that made me gag. Not rot, not blood, nothing like that. Just a wet earth smell mixed with something sharp, like bleach. I dropped it. I wiped my hands on my jeans. I looked at the child stone again, and the date on it, the little carved numbers, looked wrong. I had seen that stone plenty of times. I could not tell you the date before, but I knew it was recent compared to the older stones, and I knew it was a child. And I knew the name was short. But when I looked then, the date looked like it did not fit. The year looked older than it should have, like it belonged on one of the worn stones, not this clean white one. I blinked hard, like that would fix it. The number stayed. I told myself, you are tired. You are seeing what you fear. I took my phone out to take a picture, and the screen lit my cracked glass and my fingers looked pale. I aimed at the stone. The camera app opened. The image on my phone was not the same as what my eyes saw. On the phone, there were flowers at the base. Fresh flowers, the bundle back where it had been earlier. On my eyes, the flowers were gone and waterlogged behind me. I lowered the phone and looked with my eyes. No flowers. I raised the phone. Flowers. I did it 3 times, like a man trying to catch a magic trick. My breath came fast and loud. I whispered, "No, no, no." And I am not even sure why I whispered. Like I did not want to wake something. I backed away from the stone, eyes flicking between the real view and the phone screen. and I felt my heel sink into soft soil that should not have been soft. There was a depression, a small one, like the ground had settled. I shined my light. The soil there was darker, freshly turned, and I saw a seam, like the outline of a rectangle beneath the grass, like the vault lid was closer to the surface than it should be. My mind went cold. I thought, sinkhole. I thought, collapse. I thought, that is why the family wants an inspection, because they feel it's settling. I turned to leave. I swear I was turning to leave. Then I heard it. A sound from under the ground. Not a voice. Not words. A soft, like knuckles on wood. 1, 2, 3. Then a pause. Then 1, 2, 3 again. Patterns. Like someone testing. I froze so hard, my neck hurt. I stared at the patch of ground, and my flashlight beam shook. The knocking came again. 3 slow taps. I took a step back. Then another. My brain screamed at me to run. But my legs felt numb. I held my breath, listening. The knocking stopped. The fog seemed to thicken around me, like it leaned in. Then, from behind me, from the direction of the path, I heard gravel crunch under a footstep. 1 step, then nothing. I spun around and shined my light. The beam hit fog, then a headstone, then empty space. No one. I yelled, "Who is there?" My voice cracked. No answer. I heard another gravel crunch, closer this time, but still no shape. It was like the sound was moving without the person. I backed toward the gate, keeping my flashlight sweeping. And I kept glancing down at the ground because I wanted to see prints. I wanted proof. And there were none. The grass looked smooth. The mud looked smooth. Then the landline in my pocket, the portable one we sometimes carry, started ringing. The same flat voice said, "You can look if you want." I said, "Stop. Stop calling. Who are you?" The voice said, "It is empty." I stood there with the phone in my hand and my throat felt tight like I was going to cry. And I hate that. Man, I hate saying that, but I was right on the edge of it. Like a kid, I turned and ran back to the security room. I did not care if I tripped. I did not care if I looked stupid. My boots tore through wet grass. The gravel sounded like gunshots under my feet. I slammed the security room door and locked it, and I sat down hard in the chair, and I stared at the monitors like they were going to save me. The camera feed for the Oak section flickered back on. It was clear now. Clearer than it had been all night. No fog on the lens. The Child Stone section looked normal. Flowers at the base. Fresh. The ladder gone. The shed door closed. The ground smooth. I rewound the camera recording, my hands shaking so bad I hit the wrong buttons. I found the time around 12:55 when I was out there. The footage showed nothing. It showed the section sitting there empty. No me. No flashlight beam. No movement. Like the cemetery was alone the whole time. I sat there, staring, until my eyes burned. At 1:17, my supervisor finally called back. I answered and started talking too fast, like I could not stop, and I told him everything. The camera going black, the landline voice, the ladder, the screws on the stone, the phone showing flowers that were not there, the knocking under the ground, and I kept saying, "You have to come here. You have to come now." And he kept saying, "Calm down, Caleb. Calm down." And I could hear in his voice, he did not believe me. Not fully, like he thought I was spooked and making stories. Then I said the thing I had not said yet. He said, "It is empty." My supervisor went quiet. Then he said, "Who said?" I said, "The voice on the phone." He said, What did it say? I said, It said it is empty. He did not answer for a long moment. Then he said, Okay. You are going to stay in that room until morning. You are not going back into the cemetery. Do you hear me? I said, Yes. He said, At 6. The grounds guy will meet you. We will take a look. I said, Take a look at what? He said, At the camera, at the shedlock, and at the plot. I said, You are going to open it. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He just said, We will take a look. Then he said, Caleb. And I said, What? And he said, Do not tell anyone about this. I laughed. This short, ugly laugh. Because who would I tell? Man. Who would believe me? I said, Okay. Then he said, And do not, under any circumstances, touch anything that is sitting on that stone. I said, I did not touch it. He said, Good. Then he hung up. I sat there until morning with the lights on bright and the coffee machine cold and my phone in my hand like a weapon. Every time I blinked, I saw that phone screen with flowers on it, like it was showing me a different version of the cemetery. Around 3:40, I heard the landline ring again. I did not answer. It rang 4 times and stopped. Around 4:15, I heard, outside the security room, a soft scrape like something dragged along the loading door. I held my breath. I looked at the camera feed for the loading area. Nothing. The footsteps stopped right outside the security room, and I swear I could feel it, like a weight outside the door. Then I heard a knock on the door. 3 taps, just like the knocking under the ground. I did not move. I did not breathe. The knock came again. 3 taps. Then, silence. I sat there in that chair until the sky started turning gray and the fog thinned like a curtain lifting. At 6:08, the grounds guy arrived, and my supervisor arrived right behind him, and they looked normal, like men who slept and drank coffee and drove to work, and I wanted to scream at them for looking normal. They came into the security room and my supervisor said, You look terrible. And I said, I did not sleep. And he said, The grounds guy looked at the logbook where I had written the times, and he raised his eyebrows like he thought I was overreacting. My supervisor said, Show me the footage. I rewound the camera feed and pointed to the timestamp where it went black. On the playback, it never went black. It stayed clear. The whole night was clear. No blackout, no static, no nothing. I stared at the screen like it had betrayed me. I said it was black. I swear it was black. My supervisor looked at me and said, Maybe you hit the wrong camera input. I said, No. I said, I watched it go black. He said, Okay. He said it like he was humoring me. Then, we walked out to the cemetery together. The 3 of us. In daylight. Daylight makes cemeteries look like places you can tolerate, like parks with stones. The oak corner looked normal. The shed door was closed. The lock was locked. My supervisor unlocked it with his key and opened it. Everything inside was where it should be. The ladder was there, leaning against the wall. The spade was there, hanging on a hook. My mouth went dry. I said that spade was not there. It was in the cemetery. I brought it back. The grounds guy laughed and said, Ha! You brought a spade back and put it on its hook. I said, No. I put it in the corner in the security room. We went back and looked. There was no spade in the corner. I felt like my head was floating. My supervisor looked at me like he was starting to get annoyed. We walked to the child stone. The fresh white flowers were there. The soil inside the border looked smooth. There were no boot prints. There were no screws. There was no waterlogged bundle. Everything looked like a normal grave. My supervisor stood there with his hands on his hips and said, See? Nothing. Then the grounds guy crouched and pressed his fingers into the soil near the border. and his face changed. He said, "This is soft." My supervisor said, "What do you mean?" The grounds guy said, "The ground is settling." My supervisor looked down and his jaw tightened. He said, "Okay." He said, "Caleb, go stand by the gate, give us space." I did not want to leave them, but I did it, because he said it like an order. I walked to the gate and stood there, staring at the street, listening. I could hear them talking low behind me, words I could not make out. I could hear the grounds guy scraping with a tool, maybe a probe. Then I heard my supervisor say, "No, that cannot be." Then I heard him say, "Do not open it here." I turned and started walking back, and my supervisor snapped, "Caleb," I said, "stay there." I stopped. My hand started shaking again. I stood by the gate like a punished kid. About 10 minutes later, they came back. The grounds guy's face was pale. My supervisor's mouth was tight. He said, "Because the family requested it, and because the ground is settling, and because we have to." I said, "What did you find?" He said, "Nothing you need to worry about." I said, "Do not do that. Do not talk to me like I did not hear the knocking, like I did not see what I saw." He looked at me hard and said, "Caleb, go home and sleep." I said, "Are you going to open it?" He did not answer. He just said, "Go home." I drove home with my hands cramped on the wheel, and the whole time I kept checking my rearview mirror like the cemetery was following me. I tried to sleep, and I could not. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those 3 taps. Around noon, my phone rang. It was my supervisor. He said, "You need to come in." I said, "Why?" He said, "The vault company is here, and the family is coming, and I need you present as witness because you logged a disturbance." I said, "I do not want to go near that grave." He said, "You have to." He said it like that, flat, no argument. I went. The day was bright and humid. The fog was gone. The cemetery looked harmless. The vault company guy had a clean uniform and a clipboard. The family members stood back, stiff, holding each other's hands. Nobody cried. Nobody spoke much. It felt like a business meeting. My supervisor told me to stand near the oak, but not too close, and he told me again, "Do not touch the stone." I nodded. The vault company guy put down a tarp, brought out tools, and they started carefully digging at the edge. Not deep, just enough to expose the vault lid. It took maybe 30 minutes. The soil was damp and heavy. They lifted clumps and set them aside. They exposed the concrete lid, and it looked intact. The seal line looked unbroken. The family member, the one closest, said, "See? It is fine. It has to be fine." My supervisor said, "We just need to confirm." The vault guy pried at the edge. And there was that moment where everyone held their breath, because even opening a vault, even when it is supposed to be routine, feels like a boundary. He lifted the lid with a small jack system. The lid rose an inch, then 2. The air that came out did not smell like anything. Not earth, not decay, nothing. It smelled clean, like inside a closed cabinet. The vault guy looked surprised. He said, "That is unusual." My supervisor said, "Just open it." They lifted the lid fully. Inside was the coffin. It was there. For half a second, relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. Then the vault guy said, "Wait." He leaned in. He touched the coffin edge. He said, "It is too light." My supervisor said, "What?" The vault guy said, "It is too light." He looked at the family and said, "I am going to open the casket to confirm." "Okay." The family member nodded, eyes wide. The vault guy unlatched the coffin lid. The metal clicked. He lifted. I swear to God, dude, the coffin was empty. Not disturbed, not broken, not messy. empty, like nothing had ever been placed inside it. The lining was smooth. The little pillow was there. The fabric was neat. No stains, no marks, just an empty space shaped like it was waiting. The family member made a sound like all the air left their lungs. My supervisor stepped forward and stared. "We need said, RP. We need said, RP." The vault guy froze, then said, "That is not possible." My supervisor said, "Close it." The family member said, "Where is it? Where is my child?" My supervisor said, "Close it right now." The vault guy's hands shook as he lowered the lid, latched it, and stepped back like he had touched something poisonous. The cemetery was dead quiet. No birds, no cars, like the world muted itself. Then the family member started crying. Not loud, but this broken sound. And another family member said, "I knew it. I knew it. I told you." And my supervisor said, "Stop. Please. Stop. We will find out what happened." And he looked at me. And his eyes were wild for the first time. And he whispered, "Do you understand now why I told you not to touch the stone?" I could not answer. My mouth was dry like sand. The vault guy said, "The seal was intact. There is no way." And my supervisor said, "Close it up." And he told the grounds guy to fill it back. And the family member kept saying, "It is empty. It is empty," like the words were proof. They closed it. They lowered the lid. They covered it. They patted the soil down. In less than an hour, it looked almost normal again, except the flowers were crushed. The family left like they were walking through water. My supervisor told me to go home. He told me again not to tell anyone. I drove away shaking. That night, I did not go to work. I called in sick. I sat in my apartment with the lights on. Around 2:20 a.m., the landline in my kitchen rang. I do not even use that line. It is just there. It rang anyway. I stared at it. It rang again. I did not answer. My phone buzzed with a voicemail notification from a number I did not recognize. I played it. The same flat voice said, "You looked." And then it said, "It is still empty." Then it hung up. I threw my phone onto the couch like it burned me. I sat there breathing hard, and I realized something that made me feel like I was going to be sick. You can look if you want. It is empty. It was not guessing. It was stating a fact, like it had been waiting for me to catch up. I did not sleep. At 3 a.m., I got in my car because sitting in my apartment felt like drowning. I drove without thinking and ended up here, outside this gate. The same gate. The same cemetery. Because some stupid part of me wanted to see if it was all real. If it would look different in the dark. If the flowers would move again. If the camera would go black. The battery in my car is weak. And the engine sounds like it is begging me to turn it off. And I cannot. Because if I turn it off, I do not know if it will start again. And I do not want to be stuck here with the quiet. The gate is right there, and the street light is making that buzzing sound. And the fog is trying to come back, thin ribbons of it creeping low over the grass. And I keep tasting metal, and I keep hearing, in my head, those 3 taps, and I keep seeing that clean empty coffin, like a mouth that has been opened and found to have no tongue, no proof, nothing. And I know people will say paperwork error, wrong plot, mix-up, and maybe it is. Maybe it is all a horrible mistake, but you cannot tell me a sealed vault with an intact lid just becomes empty. You cannot tell me a camera shows nothing while I am out there. You cannot tell me my phone showed flowers, my eyes did not. You cannot tell me a voice on the line knows what is inside the ground before we open it. And you cannot tell me this is over, because it is not. Because I cannot stop thinking about how the ground looked like it was settling upward, not down, like something beneath it was pushing. And I cannot stop thinking about those footprints that walked straight there and straight back like a person following a route they had memorized. And I cannot stop thinking about the way my supervisor acted like he had been bracing for this, like he was scared of the stone itself. And I cannot stop thinking about the family member's face when they realized the grave held nothing. Like the world had cheated them twice, and now I cannot look at any headstone without imagining it is just a marker over an empty space. And that emptiness is not absence, it is a presence, it is like a promise. If I see iron fences or rows of stones, I turn my radio up so loud it hurts because silence feels like an invitation. I avoid churches with burial grounds behind them. I cannot stand the smell of cut grass anymore because it takes me right back to that damp corner under the oak. And dude, this is the part I keep looping on, the part that makes me feel like I am going to break, because I keep thinking about the simplest question, the one nobody will answer, the one that sits like a rock in my throat, and it is this. If that coffin was empty the whole time, then what have I been guarding all these nights? What was knocking from under the ground? And why did it want me to look? My name's Travis Harlan. I'm from Coyote Ridge out in West Texas, and I work as a cemetery maintenance hand, the kind that hauls water, resets sinking markers, digs when the ground lets you, and goes home with grit in the lines of your hands no matter how hard you scrub. Listen, I'm sitting here right now at 3 in the morning with my car idling like it's got asthma because the battery's been dying for months and I keep saying I'll replace it and I keep not doing it. And I'm parked on the gravel shoulder by a cemetery gate that squeaks even when nobody touches it. And I'm talking into a cracked phone screen like it's the only thing between me and whatever is on the other side of that fence. And I know how that sounds. Man, I know, but I can't keep it in anymore because I tried. I tried for weeks and then for months, and now every time I close my eyes, I'm back there with the warm dirt and the blank spot and the feeling that something wrote itself into the ground while I wasn't looking. That day started like any other day. And that's the part that makes me feel sick. Because if it had started weird, I could tell myself I was already spooked, already wound up. But it didn't. It started with breakfast on a paper plate, standing at my counter in a dim kitchen. One fried egg that broke and ran across the plate, toast that came out too dark because I got distracted watching the morning light hit the dust on the blinds, and coffee that tasted like metal because I let the pot sit too long. I remember my shirt too, because I can't wash the stain out and it makes me mad every time I see it. A faded work shirt with my name stitched on it, and a brown smear down near the second button from when a bottle of grass dye tipped over in the truck and I caught it against my chest. I remember checking my phone before I left because I had this habit, like if I look at the time enough, I can keep my day pinned down. And it said 6:12 a.m. And the sun was already bright, but it wasn't warm yet. Just that cold desert morning that tricks you into thinking you could stay outside all day until noon hits you in the face like a door. I went out to my car and the battery did that weak click click and then caught on the second try, and I told myself again I'd replace it. I swear to God, I said it out loud like a promise. Work was supposed to be simple that week. The old cemetery outside town needed routine cleanup before the first big holiday rush of visitors. And when I say holiday, I don't mean anything fancy. I mean the days people decide they have to show up with fresh flowers so they don't feel guilty, and the little cemetery can't handle a bunch of families wandering around, tripping over sunk stones and loose edging. It's a small town cemetery. Old headstones leaning like tired men. Names worn down so you have to tilt your head and catch the light just right. Plastic flowers that never really fade because the sun turns them the same pale color as everything else. And the fence is that cheap chain link with barbed wire on top like it's keeping something in, not out. It sits on hard ground. Desert brush all around, a low rise of land that looks flat. Until you're out there, and you realize you can see too far in every direction. And there's nowhere to hide. And that should make you feel safer. Right? And it does in the daytime, mostly, because you can see a car coming from a mile away. But at night, it's the opposite, because the dark isn't just around you. It's across all that open space. And your eyes can't decide what they're looking at, and you start feeling watched from everywhere at once. We'd been having trouble with the burial records. That's what I told myself it was. just paperwork trouble. The cemetery used to be run by a church years ago. Then the town took over. Then a contractor. Then a different contractor. And records got moved around in boxes and nobody cared until somebody's grandmother's marker got lost and suddenly everyone wanted answers. So the town hired our crew to do maintenance and help straighten out plots. And I got stuck on the parts nobody wanted, like checking rows against the map, taking photos, writing down which stones were cracked or sinking, and reporting anything that didn't match. I'm not some office guy. I don't like clipboards. I'm better with a shovel and a level and a wrench. But I can read a map, and I'm careful, and they trusted me with it. That morning I met my coworker out there, and I'm not going to give you his name because I'm not trying to drag him into this, and also because he'll tell you none of this happened, and he'll look you in the eye and smile and act like you're the one losing it. He showed up late like always, rolling in with dust on his bumper, chewing on something and spitting into the dirt like the ground owes him. He said, "You ready to get cooked today?" And I said, "Yeah." We checked the gate padlock, because that padlock is always sticking, and he sprayed it with some lubricant and said, "Good as new." And I remember that because later, it mattered. Later, I kept thinking about the sound it made when it opened. That squeal, and then the snap when it let go. We drove in with the truck, slow, because the paths aren't real roads, just gravel lines between rows, and the headstones are so close in places you have to watch your mirrors. The sun was coming up behind us, and the shadows of the stones were long, pointing away like fingers. We started with the easy stuff. Pick up trash, reset a couple of small markers that had tilted forward, clear a tumbleweed that had wedged itself against the fence. And we talked about dumb things, like what we were going to eat later and how my car battery was dying. And he said, "Just park on a hill, man." And I laughed. And I wish I hadn't laughed because now every hill looks like a trap to me. Around late morning, I pulled out the plot map. It was a printed sheet in a plastic sleeve with faded ink, and the rows were labeled with letters, and the plots with numbers, and a couple of handwritten notes in the corner from someone years back. There was a section on the far west side, out by a line of scrubby trees, where a bunch of markers were missing or unreadable, and our job was to make sure the map matched what was actually there. We walked it, and it was hot by then. That dry heat that makes your throat feel like paper. I kept sipping water and still felt thirsty. We moved along row by row, and I'd point and read what I could, and he'd write, and we'd mark any stone that needed cleaning or resetting. Everything was normal until we hit that section, and then it wasn't normal. But it was subtle, like a bad note in a song you can't quite place. The first wrong thing was a marker I recognized. I don't mean I recognized the person. I mean I recognized the marker itself. Like I'd seen it in my hands. And I had. Because 2 weeks earlier, I'd cleaned it, and it had a chip on the top left corner shaped like a little crescent. And I remembered it because I caught my glove on it and it tore a seam. That marker was supposed to be in the next row over, according to the map and according to my memory. But there it was. One row too far west. Like someone had picked it up and moved it while we weren't looking. I stopped and I stared at it, and my coworker said, "What?" I told myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe I mixed up rows. Maybe I cleaned a different one with a similar chip, because stones are stones, right? And you can convince yourself of anything if you want the day to keep going. But then I looked at the ground around it, and there were fresh drag marks in the dust, like something heavy had scraped across. Not deep, just enough to catch the light. And the gravel around the base was disturbed, like it had been lifted and set down again. And my stomach tightened in a way that didn't make sense for a piece of rock. I said, "Did you move this one?" A few stones later, there was a little vase holder stuck in the ground, the kind you slide flowers into, and it was crooked. I reached down to straighten it, and my fingers hit something cold and smooth, under the dust, like metal. I brushed it and found a small key. An old key with a plain head, no tag, no label, just metal worn shiny. I picked it up and held it between my fingers, and I felt a weird rush of relief. Like finding a lost object means the world is still logical. Things get dropped, You find them, you return them, order restored. I said, somebody dropped a key, and my coworker finally looked over and said, pocket it. Somebody will ask later. And I did. I put it in my shirt pocket, and it sat there heavy against my chest all day like a reminder. Then we reached the spot that wasn't on the map the way it should have been. The map showed 3 empty plots, a little rectangle of blank space labeled reserved in faded ink. In real life, there was 1 empty plot and 2 filled plots, and then a 4th thing that made my brain stall. It was a fresh grave. Not just a mound of dirt, not just disturbed ground, a clean, rectangular patch with soil that looked turned over recently, like someone had dug down and filled it back in. No headstone, no temporary marker, no flowers, no sign, just dirt. And the dirt looked dark, darker than the surrounding ground, like it came from deeper down where it hasn't been bleached by sun. That alone could happen. People get buried and the marker comes later. I know that. But this cemetery isn't busy. You don't bury someone without everybody hearing about it. And there's paperwork. There's always paperwork. We would have known. I stared at it, and my coworker stared at it, and for a second neither of us spoke, and the silence felt thick. I said, "That's new." And he shrugged and said, "Maybe they did a burial after hours." I said, "There would be a record." He said, "There's never a record around here." And he tried to make it sound like a joke, but it didn't land. I crouched down and put my hand over the soil, not touching it at first, just hovering. And here's the part that makes me sound crazy, man. I know, but I swear to God, not sun warmth, because the sun was overhead and everything was hot. But this was different, like the warmth you feel from a running engine, steady, coming from within. I touched it with the back of my fingers, quick, like a test, and it was warm, warmer than the ground around it. I pulled my hand back and looked at my coworker, and he was watching me with this tight little smile, like he was waiting for me to say something embarrassing. I said, "Feel that." And he said, "It's dirt. It gets hot." And I said, "Not like this." And he finally leaned down and touched it. Just a tap. And I watched his face change for half a second, like surprise, like confusion, and then it was gone, and he stood up and said, I stood up too, and my heart was beating in my throat, and I tried to tell myself it was just the heat, just my brain being dramatic. But then the wind came up, and it rattled the plastic flowers in the row behind us, and the sound was like a dry whisper, like a bunch of cheap petals clicking teeth together, and the air smelled wrong for a second, like wet earth after rain. But there hadn't been rain in weeks. I remember that because my brain grabbed it like a hook. That smell. Because wet earth in the desert is a big deal. You notice it. It's relief. It's life. And there was no reason for it to be there. I said, "Do you smell that?" And my coworker said, "Smell what?" And he started walking away, like if he moved fast enough, the moment couldn't catch him. I should have walked away too. I should have said, "Not my problem, call the office, let someone else deal with it. But my job is to keep things in order." Man, that's literally what I do. I take things that have shifted and I put them back. And when I saw that patch of dirt with no marker, no record, and warmth coming off it like it was alive, my brain did what it always does. It tried to fix it. I took out my phone and snapped a photo. The screen glare was bad, so I took 2 more, and then I tried to take a video, and my phone froze. Just locked up, no warning. I held the power button and nothing happened for a second, and then the screen went black, and I felt this rush of panic that had nothing to do with technology, like losing the screen meant losing a light in a dark room. Then the phone came back on, and the time in the corner was wrong. I blinked and squinted and checked again, and then it flickered and jumped to 11:47 like it had corrected itself. My coworker saw me staring and said, And, your phone messing up. And I said, yeah. And I didn't tell him about the 7-3 because I didn't want to sound like a man who's unraveling in the sun. We decided, or I decided, and he went along, to call the town office later and ask if there had been a burial we didn't know about. Until then, we kept working. We moved away from that plot and into the older section, and I tried to shake it off. I focused on tasks. Measure the lean of a stone. Mark a cracked base. Tighten a little metal nameplate that had come loose. But the feeling didn't leave. That sense that the ground had changed under us in a way we weren't allowed to notice. Around mid-afternoon, the heat got brutal, and the air shimmered over the gravel, and the horizon looked like it was floating. And we took a break in the shade of the truck, even though the shade didn't help much. I drank water until my stomach sloshed. My coworker chewed and spit and told a story about a guy he knew who tried to sleep in his truck out by the cemetery once and woke up with all the windows fogged up from the inside like someone had been breathing in there. He laughed when he told it, like it was funny. I didn't laugh. I kept looking toward that west side, toward the line of scrubby trees. The sun was behind them then, and the shadows were stretching again, and something about the shadows looked wrong. I can't explain it cleanly. Shadows should fall away from light. Everybody knows that. But for a second, just a second, I saw a headstone's shadow bend toward the sun, like it was reaching back. It made my eyes water. I blinked hard, and when I looked again, it was normal. My coworker said, and I wanted to tell him I felt like the cemetery was making decisions around us. Like it was moving pieces when we weren't looking. But I kept my mouth shut. We finished the day and locked the gate. I remember the sound of the padlock. It didn't squeal that time. It clicked smooth, like it had never been stuck. My coworker said, "See, I told you, good as new." And he slapped the chain link like it was a joke, and the vibration ran along the fence with this low twang that made my teeth hurt. I went home and tried to eat, but my mouth tasted like dust, and I kept thinking about the warm soil. I showered, and the water ran brown for a second at the drain because of the dirt caked on my legs, and I stared at that brown water like it was proof of something. That night, I lay in bed and listened to the desert wind push against my window, and I kept checking my phone, and every time I checked it, the battery dropped faster than it should have, like the phone was working harder than it admitted. Around midnight, I sat up and realized I still had that key in my shirt pocket. I took the shirt off the chair and reached in and pulled the key out. It was warm too, warmer than it should be sitting in a room. I held it, and I felt this stupid urge to go back out there, like the key belonged to the cemetery, and the cemetery wanted it returned. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I put the key on my dresser and went back to bed. In the morning, it was gone. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I misplaced it. I knocked it off the dresser. It fell into a crack. Normal stuff. I got on my hands and knees and searched. I moved the bed. I shook out the sheets. I checked the pockets again. Nothing. And the part that makes my skin go cold is this. When I went back to work and told my coworker, "Hey, remember that key I found yesterday? It's gone." He looked at me like I'd made it up. He said, "What key?" And I said, "The key I found by the vase holder. You saw it." And he said, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about. You didn't find any key." His voice was calm. His face was normal. He wasn't messing with me like a prank. It was like his memory didn't have that moment in it. I stood there in the morning sun and felt my stomach drop. I said, "You told me to pocket it." And he shrugged and said, "I didn't say that." And then he walked away to get the truck. That was the first time I thought, seriously, not joking, that something was happening that wasn't just heat and tiredness. We went back out there anyway because what else do? You have a job, you do it. And the cemetery was there like always. Gate squeaking, dust swirling, headstones leaning, but it didn't feel the same. It felt like walking into a room after an argument, like the air held a grudge. We headed straight for the west side, because I couldn't not, because my brain needed to confirm the grave was real, needed to see it again so I could anchor myself. And when we got there, the fresh grave was still there, but it wasn't the same. The soil was smoother, like someone had tamped it down. There was a temporary marker now, a simple stake stuck at the head, but the stake was blank. No name, no dates, nothing. Just wood. That made me feel worse, not better. Because blank doesn't happen. Even a temporary marker has something. A number, a letter, anything. I said, "Who put that there?" And my coworker said, "Probably the office." And I said, "It's blank." And he said, "Maybe they ran out of tags." And he kept saying things like that. Normal excuses. And none of them fit. I walked closer, and I saw something else. There were footprints around it, not ours. We had thick tread. These prints were narrow, almost smooth, like a shoe with little texture, and they circled the grave in a slow loop. The dust was fresh enough that the prints looked new, but there were no other tracks leading in or out, just a circle, like someone had walked around and then vanished. I stood there, staring, and my coworker said, "Quit staring, you're making it weird." And I said, "It is weird." And he finally snapped, just a little, and said, "It's dirt. It's a stick." And then he lowered his voice and said, "Don't get in your head, man. You'll make yourself sick." That hit me hard because it sounded like he was repeating something someone told him, like he'd been coached. We worked that day and the next. Each day the grave changed slightly. The soil would be uneven, then smooth, then uneven again, like someone was tending it without leaving tracks. The blank stake leaned left one day and right the next. Once, I swear, I saw a faint mark on it, like a smudged letter. And when I leaned closer, it was gone. Just wood again. The warmth never left. Even early in the morning, when the ground around it was cool, that patch radiated heat like a buried engine. I tried to do the logical thing. I called the town office. I asked if there had been a burial in that section. The woman on the phone put me on hold, came back, and said, "No, there's no burial scheduled and no burial completed in that area." I said, "There is a fresh grave." And she said, "Sir, are you sure you're looking at the right plot?" And I said, "I'm standing in it." And she sighed like I was a problem she didn't have time for and said, "We'll send someone to look next week." Next week, like it was a pothole. I hung up and felt helpless in a way I'm not used to. On the fourth day, late afternoon, my coworker went back to town for supplies and left me alone out there. I didn't like being alone in that cemetery anymore, but I told myself it was daytime. Sun's still up, nothing can happen in daylight, and that's such a dumb thing to believe. Man, because daylight doesn't stop anything, it just makes you feel like you're allowed to ignore it. I decided to do one thing I hadn't done yet. I decided to check the map against the ground right at that grave to see if it was even supposed to be a plot. I walked back to the truck, grabbed the map sleeve, and came back. The map showed the blank reserved plots. No mention of an active burial. I stood there in the heat, holding the map so it wouldn't flap in the wind, and I looked from paper to ground to paper again. And then, without any warning, the ink on the map looked different. The word reserved wasn't there anymore. In its place, in the same faded ink, was a name. Just a name. First and last. I'm not going to say it. I can't say it. Because every time I say it in my head, I feel like the cemetery notices. But it was a normal name, like someone you'd see on a receipt, like a neighbor, like a mechanic. Under it were dates, and the dates didn't make sense. The birth date was normal enough, a year that could be someone older. The death date was next week. Not today. Not yesterday. Next week. I stared until my eyes burned. I flipped the sleeve over like maybe there was another version under it. No. Same. I ran my finger over the print like I could feel fresh ink. It was dry. It looked like it had always been there. My heart started pounding, and I looked around, because I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone, like the air behind me had weight. The cemetery was quiet. No traffic noise. No birds. Even the wind seemed to pause for a second like it was listening. I said out loud, to nobody, "This is not funny." Like the cemetery was a person playing a joke. And that's when I heard footsteps on gravel. Slow. Behind me. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Pause. Like someone taking careful steps between stones. I turned. Fast. And there was nobody. Just rows of markers leaning, and a couple of plastic flower bouquets nodding in the breeze that had started again. I stood there holding the map, and the footsteps continued, but they weren't on any path I could see. They sounded like they were right behind the stones, moving parallel to me, matching my position without showing themselves. I swear to God, dude. I swear, I'm telling you, I backed up. And the sound backed up too. I stepped forward, and the sound stepped forward. It was like something was walking just out of sight, always one row away. I spun in a circle and saw nothing. The sun was low and bright, and the shadows were long again. And every shadow looked like it could hide a person, and none of them did. I said, "Hello," and my voice came out thin, and then I heard my name. Not shouted, not loud, just my name spoken like a normal conversation, like someone at the gate calling you over. Travis. It came from the direction of the fresh grave. My skin went cold, even though the air was hot. I didn't answer. I took a step back, and the gravel under my boots crunched loud in my ears like I was the only real thing making sound. And then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out so fast I almost dropped it. I didn't want to look down. I stood there frozen like a kid, refusing to look under a bed. I looked up, because looking down felt like obeying, and I stared at the fresh grave. The soil was smooth again. Too smooth. Like someone had pressed it flat with a board. The blank stake stood straight. And then, right in front of my eyes, the soil shifted. Not a burst, not dramatic. Just a slow settling, like the ground exhaling. A shallow dent formed near the center, like a handprint without fingers, like pressure from beneath. I stumbled back and my heel hit a stone and I almost went down. The footsteps on gravel stopped. The air went dead, still. The smell of wet earth hit me so strong it made me dizzy, like rain-soaked soil right under your nose. And there was no rain, no moisture, nothing, and my brain kept trying to reject it because it didn't belong in that place. I heard my name again. Closer, and this time it sounded like my own voice trying to imitate itself, like a recording played wrong. Travis. I backed away from that grave, away from that section, and I kept my eyes forward because I didn't want to see another shift in the soil, didn't want to confirm anything else. I walked fast toward the truck, and the gravel paths seemed longer than they should, like the rows stretched. I checked my phone time without meaning to. It said 6:04 p.m. That was wrong because it should have been around 4. Then it blinked and said 4:17. Then it blinked and said 6:04 again. I shoved it back in my pocket like it was burning me. When I reached the truck, the keys weren't where they always were. I always left them in the same cup holder spot because I'm a creature of habit. They weren't there. I tore through the cab, checked the seat, the dash, the floor, and my panic rose so hard I felt sick. Then I saw them. They were hanging from the rearview mirror, like someone had placed them there, swaying gently, tapping the glass. I didn't remember putting them there. I grabbed them, and my hand brushed something else hanging there. A key. The old key I found the first day. It was on my ring now, like it belonged. I stared at it until my eyes watered. I yanked it off and threw it onto the passenger seat. My hands were shaking so hard I fumbled the ignition. The engine turned over slow, like the battery was dying right then, and for a second I thought it wouldn't start and I'd be stuck, and then it caught with a rough cough. I put it in gear and drove toward the gate fast enough that the truck bounced. The gate was closed. It should have been open because we were inside and we hadn't shut it. I stared at the gate and felt this horrible calm settle over me, like the cemetery was saying, no. I got out and ran to the padlock. The padlock was locked. Not just latched, locked. The chain was looped tight like someone had done it carefully. I dug in my pocket for the key to the padlock, the real key, and my fingers came up empty. I checked my other pocket, my shirt pocket, my jeans, and nothing. My breath went short. I went back to the truck, tore through it, and my eyes fell on the old key on the seat. Against every instinct, I grabbed it. It was warm. I ran back to the padlock, and I held the old key up to it like a joke, like desperation. The key fit. It slid in smooth, like it had been made for it. I turned it, and the padlock clicked open. I stood there staring because that shouldn't happen. That key was old and plain and not tagged, and our padlock is newer. And keys don't just fit because you need them to. I pulled the lock off and opened the gate, and the gate squealed loud, and the sound echoed across the open land like a scream trying to be polite. I jumped back in the truck and drove out, and didn't look in the mirror until I was a mile down the road. And when I did, the cemetery was still there, small behind me, fence line straight, gate closed again, and I could have told myself it was over, but my phone buzzed again. I pulled it out with one hand, eyes flicking between road and screen. A message. Again, no sender. It said, "You forgot the map." I hadn't. The map sleeve was on the seat. I looked at it, and my blood went cold because the name I saw earlier was gone. Like nothing had happened. I started laughing, like a short broken sound, because it was either laugh or pull over and throw up. When my coworker came back later, he found me at the shop sitting in the truck with my hand still on the wheel, like I couldn't let go. He asked what was wrong, and I tried to tell him. I tried to explain about the map changing and the footsteps and the texts and the warm soil and the key fitting the padlock, and he listened with this expression like he was watching a man dig his own hole. When I finished, he said, like a doctor, he said, "There is no fresh grave out there." He said, "There is no blank stake." He said, "There is no key." He said, "You're making yourself sick." And I snapped. I swear I did. I raised my voice and said, "You saw it. You touched it. You were there." And he shook his head and said, "I wasn't with you today. I went for supplies. You were alone." And I said, and he said, "Exactly. You got in your head." He said, "The office called and said there's nothing unusual." He said, "We're not talking about this anymore." And then he walked away like that, settled it. The next day I couldn't make myself go back. I sat in my car in the driveway with the engine struggling and my hands sweating, and I couldn't turn toward that road. I called in sick. I called in sick again the day after. They replaced me. I quit a week later. I told everyone it was because the pay wasn't worth it, and my battery needed fixing, and I needed something closer to town. Nobody argued. Nobody asked questions. I tried to convince myself it would fade if I stayed away, because the cemetery didn't stay put in my mind. It leaked into everything. I'd be at a stoplight and see a small patch of dirt by the curb, and my brain would say, "Still warm." I'd hear gravel under tires and think of footsteps matching mine one row away. I'd look at a printed receipt and swear the letters shifted when I looked away, like ink was a suggestion, not a fact. My phone started doing things it never did before, freezing, showing wrong times, dropping battery fast. One night I woke up at 2:58 a.m., wide awake, and my phone was on my chest like I'd fallen asleep holding it, even though I always leave it on the dresser. The screen was lit, a draft in the message app, no sender. Just a typed line sitting there waiting. Next week. I deleted it. I turned the phone off. I put it in a drawer. In the morning, it was on the dresser again. On. Like nothing. I started avoiding that road. I started taking longer routes to get anywhere that might pass near any burial ground. In a small town, that's hard. Because there's always a cemetery somewhere. Always a fence line you glimpse. Always a cluster of stones in the distance. I'd turn the radio up when I had to drive near one. Not music, just noise. Just something to fill the quiet because quiet makes space for footsteps. I couldn't stand the idea of standing by a hole in the ground and feeling warmth from below. I couldn't stand the idea of seeing a blank marker and wondering if it was waiting for ink. And listen, here's the part I keep trying to explain to myself like a grown man, like a rational person. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone did dig a hole and refill it. Maybe some kid thought it would be funny. Maybe the office did a secret burial and didn't record it for some reason. Though I don't know why anyone would do that. Maybe my phone glitched and my brain stitched fear around it because I was tired and dehydrated and alone in a place made for quiet. I've tried to tell myself all of that. I've said it in the mirror like an argument. But then there are the things I can't file away. The key that disappeared from my dresser and then showed up on my truck keyring. The key that fit the padlock when it shouldn't have. I replaced my truck keys 2 months after that because I couldn't stand looking at them. And when I got the new keys cut, the old key was in my pocket again at the end of the day. Warm, like it had been there the whole time. I threw it in a trash can at a gas station and drove away. I didn't tell anyone because who do you tell without them looking at you like you need help? Another thing, the time. After that day, my sense of time got warped around cemeteries. I'd drive past one and glance at the clock, and it would say one thing, and then I'd look again and it would be different, and I'd check my phone and it wouldn't match the car clock, and I'd feel that same panic I felt out there when the map changed. Once, months later, I drove past that old cemetery by accident because there was road construction, and I got detoured, and I told myself I could handle it. I kept my eyes on the road. I kept the radio loud, and still my stomach knotted. When the fence came into view, the radio cut out. Not static, just silence. The display still lit, the volume still up. Silence. And my phone buzzed. I didn't want to look. I didn't. I kept driving. My car battery sputtered like it was about to die. Right there, right alongside the fence. I pressed the gas and begged it in my head. Come on, come on. And it caught and kept going. When I was 2 miles past, the radio came back on like nothing. My phone stopped buzzing. When I finally looked at it later, there were no missed messages, no notifications, nothing. Just like it never happened. That's what it does, man. That's the pattern. It happens, it leaves you shaking, and then it erases its own footprints, so you sound crazy if you try to report it. And I keep thinking about the map, that moment with the name and the date that hadn't happened yet. Because here's the thing I forgot to tell you. Wait, I forgot to tell you. This is important. A week after that day, I heard about a man who died. Not someone close, just someone in town, a working guy. People talked about it the way small towns do, half sympathy, half curiosity. When I heard the name, my stomach dropped so hard I had to sit down. It was the name that had been on the map, the same first and last. And the date they said he died was the date I'd seen on that map, the date that had been next week when I first saw it. I'm telling you. I sat there with my hands shaking, and I tried to calculate if I'd misread it, if my brain had swapped numbers. But I know what I saw. I know it. I didn't even know that man personally. And yet the cemetery had put his name into my hands before anyone else was talking about him. I tried to go back to the office then, to tell the woman on the phone, to say, "You need to check that plot. You need to open the ground. You need to figure out what's going on." But I couldn't. I couldn't make myself be the person who says those words out loud, because saying it feels like inviting it to answer. So I kept quiet. And then, 2 days after his funeral, I drove past that cemetery again at dusk. Not on purpose. Just a turn I didn't mean to take, because I was tired and thinking about something else. And as the fence slid by my window, I saw the west section. I saw a small cluster of people standing there like dark shapes. I saw a fresh mound. I saw a temporary stake, and for a second, I saw writing on it. Not blank, written. A name. The same name. And then the angle changed and it was gone, behind a row of stones. And I kept driving, and my heart was hammering, and my mouth tasted like metal. That's why I'm here now, sitting at this gate, because I can't stop orbiting it like a bug around a porch light. I hate it. I hate that it has a pull on my brain, but I need to say it out loud somewhere. I need to put it in the world so it isn't just trapped in my head, and I picked this spot because it's the closest I can get without going inside, because I promised myself I won't go inside again. I won't walk between those stones anymore. I won't let the gravel get under my boots and let something match my steps one row away. I won't put my hand over warm dirt and pretend it's just sun. I won't look at printed ink and trust it. I change routes now. I add 10 minutes to a drive if it means not seeing headstones. If someone mentions visiting a grave, my throat tightens and I make an excuse. If I see plastic flowers in a store, I walk away. If I smell wet earth after rain, I feel relief for half a second and then fear hits me because wet earth in the desert is supposed to be a blessing and now it feels like a warning. I keep my phone face down at night because I can't stand the idea of it lighting up with a message from nowhere. I've replaced the battery in my car twice since then, and it still acts weak near cemeteries like the car itself wants to stall and leave me stranded by a gate. And I know you might be thinking, then why are you parked here right now? Why would you do this to yourself? And I don't have a clean answer. Maybe because part of me still wants to prove it wasn't real. Maybe because part of me wants to catch it in the act, to take a photo that stays, to have something I can show so I'm not just the guy with a story. Maybe because the truth is I don't think it cares whether I believe or not. I think it just does what it does. It writes names into places. It moves markers one row over and watches you doubt yourself. It makes a blank stake when it wants you to feel the shape of a person without the comfort of a label. It folds time just enough that you can't prove it, and it keeps things warm that shouldn't be warm. The gate is right there in front of me, chain link and barbed wire, and beyond it the rows are dark shapes under the thin moon. The wind is low, the plastic flowers are barely moving, and my phone battery is dropping faster than it should, even though it's plugged in. Even though it was at full when I started talking. I'm watching the percentage fall, like it's bleeding out. I keep telling myself it's just an old phone, just cold air, just some glitch. But my hands are shaking and my throat feels tight and I can't stop looking at the padlock on the gate because I know, if I got out right now and walked up and tried the latch, there's a chance it would open with a key I threw away months ago. And that thought alone makes me feel like I'm standing on the edge of something I'm not supposed to step into. I'm going to leave. I have to leave. I'm saying that out loud because my body won't move otherwise. I'm going to put the car in gear and drive away and take the long route home and keep the radio loud and keep my eyes forward. But before I do, I need you to hear one last thing because it's the part that sits on my chest every night. That date I saw on the map. The death date that was next week. It wasn't the only wrong date. I saw another one under it. Faint. Like the ink didn't want to show. A second set of dates. Smaller. Like a note. And I didn't understand it then. I thought it was a printing smudge. But now, every time I check my phone at 3 a.m., Every time I wake up without knowing why. Every time I drive by a cemetery and the clocks don't match. I think about that faint second date, the one that looked like it belonged to me. Like the numbers were trying to form my birth year and my name. And I keep telling myself I imagined it. I keep telling myself I'm making patterns out of fear, but I don't go inside cemeteries anymore because I don't want to give it a chance to write the rest cleanly.